This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.
There we go.
Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to the 60th meeting of the Economy Committee. Some members will be attending this morning's meeting via video conference and our witnesses will be briefing via Starleaf also. The meeting will be broadcast live when open to the public and a recording will be made available on the committee's web pages on the Assembly website. So just to remind members to mute their devices when they aren't speaking. So moving on to item number 1, which is apologies. We have apologies from Mervyn.
Yes,
I think
Chair.
that's the only one we have so far.
Yes, so far, yeah.
Thank you. And then item number 2 is draft minutes. So the draft minutes are at page 5 of your pack for the meeting held on the 28th of April. Are members content that those are an accurate reflection of the meeting?
Thank you.
Moving on then to item number 3, which is Chair's business. At page 15 of your pack, there is a copy of the Department of Finance's document, Public Expenditure Terminology, which has been provided as a reference for members. And the committee office is currently organising a budget training session for members. Okay, so that's just to note for people.
Yeah, we're just trying to get that done as soon as we can, Chair.
Moving on then to the next Chair's business, there is correspondence from the DALO at page 4 of your table papers regarding a legislative consent motion to be brought by the Minister in respect of amendments to the Company Directors Disqualification Order 2020 applying in the North. The amendments are to facilitate investigation of the conduct of directors of companies which have been dissolved and, where appropriate, the taking of proceedings to have them disqualified. The urgency over introducing this amendment to the legislation in Britain relates to concerns over potential fraud occurring in the loan and grant schemes that were established to assist companies through the pandemic. It's intended that the measures will apply retrospectively. And this will enable the conduct of directors to be investigated and, where it is found to be unacceptable, disqualification action to be taken in the case of companies which have been dissolved before the date on which the Westminster Act is passed, as well as after the date. The Minister will be seeking the Executive's agreement both to the amendments to the Act being included in the Westminster Bill and to the necessary LCM being tabled in the Assembly. So members are content that in anticipation of the LCM being laid and a committee report being required to consult with our relevant stakeholders.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then moving on, there's another item of Chair's business. The committee has previously received correspondence from the Teaching English as a Foreign Language colleges which have not received support during the COVID pandemic. A departmental response on their issues is in the pack in matters arising, I think.
6.9, yeah.
And just to seek members' agreement that we will schedule an informal meeting with the colleges to hear some of the issues that they have been facing.
Thank you.
And then finally, I think under Chair's business, we have a ministerial briefing next week that members will be aware of, and it primarily will be in relation to the Economic Recovery Action Plan. The Minister attended the committee previously on the 16th of December. However, just to let members know, the committee has not invited the Minister to attend again prior to now for reasons the members have previously discussed, and the Minister has to leave the meeting next Wednesday at 11:15. However, she has agreed to come to the meeting early from 9:30 to give us a bit longer. And this is one of our committee's short meetings, so the Minister's briefing will be our only briefing next week. So are members content that we would begin our meeting next week at 9:30?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so moving on then to item number 4, which is the departmental briefing on the High Street Voucher Scheme. There is a clerk's memo at page 96. There is a copy of the press release from the Minister on the announcement of the High Street Stimulus Scheme at page 98. There is a written briefing paper on the budget position for the department dated the 2nd of April at page 100, and an updated clerk's memo at page 8 of your table papers. So just if we can bring into the spotlight, please, Keith Foster, who's Director of Strategic Policy, Economic Policy Unit, Dave Vincent, who's Strategic Digitisation Advisor at the Strategic Investment Board, Tommy O'Reilly from the Economic Strategy Unit in DFE, and Naomi Waite, who is Director of Marketing at Tourism NI. So if I hand over to yourselves to make an opening statement, and then we can open it up to members, some discussion and questions.
Good morning, Chair, and committee members, and perhaps I can start by sort of thanking you for the opportunity to come along and brief the committee on both schemes which are part of the Economic Recovery Action Plan. The Minister made an announcement last Friday that the Executive had the launch of the High Street Prepaid scheme represents a significant boost to the local economy, with a commitment that all citizens in Northern Ireland will receive a £100 prepaid card in the coming months to be spent in the local economy. This scheme was first mentioned in November 2020 when the Finance Minister announced a £300 million COVID-19 support package, which included a provision for 95 million High Street Voucher scheme that would give people a prepaid card for use in local businesses. In addition to the injection of £95 million into the local economy, the Department for the Economy at the time stated that the multiplier effect of this scheme from people spending more than the value of the card and the ripple effect from purchases will deliver even greater economic benefits and make a significant step to kickstarting our economy. This type of stimulus pumps money directly into businesses that are open and trading, as opposed to grant payments, which give money to businesses which are closed and are having to furlough staff. The primary reason for not progressing the scheme during the 2021 financial year was the public health situation and the lockdown, which we commenced in late December 20. This resulted in non-essential businesses being closed, meaning the use of prepaid cards during this period would not have directly benefited the targeted retail and hospitality sectors, would contradict the stay-at-home advice from the Department of Health, and could potentially have increased the risk of community transmission. Despite deciding not to progress with implementation, in the last financial year, officials have been continuing to work on the scheme, examining a range of issues, including the different delivery options, including the development of the outline business case, the legislation required to make these types of payments, options, issues relating to fraud and error, and examples of these types of schemes in other parts of the world. There's also been an extensive round of consultations with key stakeholders to hear their views on what should be included within the scheme and how best to ensure it is delivered in a way that has the greatest impact. The Minister has also commissioned some preliminary research into when the scheme would be most beneficial in the economic recovery. It's expected that there will be pent-up demand following the easing of restrictions, and whilst research is ongoing, the Department believes that the end of the summer is probably the most appropriate time to deliver this spending boost. DFE believes the successful delivery of the High Street Support Scheme will provide an important response to COVID in helping safeguard jobs and businesses in the current crisis, while also making a direct contribution to a strong, competitive, regionally balanced economy. The wholesale and retail sector employs just over 130,000 people in Northern Ireland, entirely reliant on consumer spending, which is forecast or estimated to have fallen by about 8% in 2020. Implementation of the scheme and pump priming of the economy will lead to an improved level of customer confidence and increased levels of public spending when safe to do so. The committee will be aware of examples around the world of similar schemes to those agreed by the Executive last week. In Malta and Jersey, there have been spend local prepaid card and voucher type schemes in boosting the local economies. There is some evidence that these schemes have been successful, and indeed in Malta, they have launched a second with the injection of another round of €50 million to provide further support to specific sectors in the economy. There are some risks that some people will simply choose to use their prepaid card to pay for goods or services that they would have purchased anyway. And some evidence from jury suggests that this has freed up money for consumers to spend on other high street, high value items. There could also be a timing effect in that people bring forward purchases, which they would have made later in the year, and therefore in both of these scenarios, the whole year's total spend remains largely unchanged. There are a range of technical and delivery issues which DFE project will have to address in the coming months, and we can explain some of these later in the meeting when we discuss how the department is currently planning to deliver the scheme. We are aware that there will be significant interest in the proposed scheme from both citizens and retailers, and we're planning a comprehensive process of stakeholder engagement and marketing in order to give retailers confidence in the infrastructure and to encourage citizens to use their prepaid card or vouchers to help achieve outcomes. The current view is that the scheme should exclude online purchases, cash withdrawals, and use for gambling purposes. And whilst it's been suggested that some retailers that have not been negatively affected by lockdown should be excluded from the scheme, the department believes that this is difficult to administer fairly and it will add complexity into the design. The current preferred approach is to encourage citizens via an extensive media campaign to use their cards in a way that will maximise the benefits of the scheme to support local businesses. We have already engaged with business organisations and chambers who we will partner with to get the messaging right and encourage people to spend local. At this time, all of the detail around the policy and legislation has not yet been finalised or approved by the Minister. This work's continuing, and we will continue to refine the policy in the coming weeks and will be putting advice to the Minister on these issues. I make this point today because it could be that we will be able to fully answer all of the questions or some of the questions as the work may be still ongoing or the Minister has not finalised the policy. At this point, Chair, I'm going to finish, and myself and my colleagues are happy to answer questions that you and the committee may have on either the High Street prepaid card scheme or on the tourist. And we'll ensure the committee is kept updated as we work through the next stages.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that briefing, Tommy. It's useful to get that as background, and as you've highlighted yourself there in your comments, there is significant interest in the scheme, and committee members only became aware of the scheme being announced last Friday with the press release and had no prior awareness of it, that it was going to be announced, and even for today we haven't had a background briefing paper in relation to what has been included or what the level of development has been to date, other than what you have outlined there now. And you have highlighted that there is some initial research being carried out. What specifically is that looking at, and what do you think the time frame will be for that piece of work being completed? And as you have highlighted there, the fuller policy being put before the Minister for approval?
So Chair, the research now has been commissioned, and we are expecting that it will be completed probably within the next 4 to 6 weeks. And that will then give us some further feedback in terms of, and it's really looking at the question in terms of the impact, in terms of into the retail sector, and of the spend being brought into the market. So we are expecting to get that completed in the very near future, and clearly, the committee will be briefed on that in due course.
Okay, thanks for that. And we there are some details which were outlined in the press statement in relation to, for example, that there would be an application process in relation to that. And if I understand it correctly, it's an online application process. I was just wondering, has the department given any consideration to barriers that might exist, for people with poor internet access, for example, or and I think you referred to this in your comments about how it will be publicised to make sure that basically everybody can benefit from the scheme.
So Chair, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in Dave at this point, because Dave's been leading the work on the delivery in terms of looking at how the application process might work from a technical viewpoint, and maybe then Keith can pick up on some of the issues around or how we're going to engage to make sure that those people who may have difficulties are going to address those sorts of issues. Dave? No?
Oh, is Dave maybe on mute?
No, he's not.
Having some difficulties hearing Dave.
Okay. No, I can't hear himself. Sure. So, maybe we'll go back to David. Dave?
Yep, no, that's fine. If Keith maybe wants to take over about the...
Sometimes the Starleaf system is not at its best with headsets. I don't know if there's anything technical there that can be done, but...
So, Keith, do you want to speak then about sort of the plans for the groups, the advisory groups?
Oh, we can't hear Keith either.
Either?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Right. I can pick up a little bit, Chair, just in terms of what Dave was going to allude to. I'm sure we looked comprehensively at what the best approach would be to enable, identify the eligible population for the cards. Effectively, that was through sort of two approaches. One was a pull approach, as it's termed, and one was a push approach. The push approach would have been issuing cards that we, could have identified sort of an eligible population. We felt on the balance of, risk, etc., that it was better to try and put a portal in place that would enable registrations to be forthcoming on the portal. We would engage in quite a comprehensive marketing campaign to sort of encourage those details to be registered in the portal, and then the cards would be issued to eligible individuals. I won't say any more than that because Dave's really got the expertise in that space and could go into that in a little bit more detail. On the other point around how do we ensure that we're as inclusive as possible, I think the point is we are standing up a number of advisory groups that will look specifically at this issue. So, for example, those that are basically disengaged or do not have access to the internet, we will, through the advisory group, seek to understand what is the best mechanism by which we could target those individuals. So there's a comprehensive programme of activity planned in that space.
Okay, thank you for that. And Tommy, could I maybe just ask as well about, we know that, for example, it can't be used online, so can we just maybe get a wee bit of information about how technically that will be prevented, and whether click and collect, for example, will be provided for, to help people, use local retailers for that, and if there will be any other restrictions in relation to the High Street voucher scheme, and then we can pick up on the tourism voucher separately from that.
Okay, sure. So in terms of, let's say, the delivery mechanism, what we're working with Dave and the team is really putting in place a number of different processes. So the first stage really is around, through NI Direct, will really be the use of a portal, which will be there to gather the information in order to help us understand who of the sort of 1.4 million people in Northern Ireland are applying for the cards and get some basic details. One of the reasons why we're going is because, the department needs to be very conscious of issues around fraud and error. As you're aware, the Audit Office have made a number of comments around schemes that have been run in the past, and we are trying to ensure that we've got a technical response in place which protects public monies as far as possible. The use of a portal allows us then to gather that information, cross-check that information, and ensuring we're getting the money to the right people across Ireland. Outside of that, then, we're really then starting to develop how we're going to direct the businesses to ensure that, that they're confident that the technical solutions which are in place can deal with their demands and their needs. We'll start to look at sort of the citizens of Northern Ireland and how we ensure that they're able to get access to the services in local shops and local businesses. But that's the work that we're doing in terms of the actual service design and how the sort of customer flow or the citizen flow will go through the process. And Dave will be leading it. Dave, are you back online again?
I am.
There he is.
We can hear you.
Good morning. Apologies, Chair.
It happens more often than you think.
So Dave, we're just talking about the issue around click and collect and other access revenues for local businesses and for citizens. Do you want to say some more about the technical solution around that?
I guess, and apologies for missing that initial part of the conversation. I guess, Chair, just to revisit very quickly, it is a digital first solution, but significant engagement around the digital proxy element of the service and the ability to allow members of the public to register using a telephone service, but also significant activation activity going on with the potential to mobilise in towns and villages around the region as well, and hands-on support for those who either don't have access, aren't capable of doing that, and also working with stakeholder organisations who represent some of the digitally disengaged and making sure that we have a holistic approach to that. From a consultation perspective and an engagement with the wider sector, we've done some significant engagement with them already, trying to understand their requirements from the scheme and how they can support it, but also the constraints they may have. A number of technical considerations in there, and Tommy may already have alluded to this, but digital first and also the prepaid card supporting some of the requirements from the sector around no need for additional infrastructure or training, and that it just fitted in with the existing infrastructure that they have in place and wasn't something they had to invest in on top. But also talking to them about how they can mobilise and support the scheme and support the specific messaging of the scheme and the aims and objectives of the scheme and the public relations and marketing campaign that will go on to really clearly articulate the objectives of the scheme and how we want members of the public to get involved, and allowing those retailers to be fully engaged in that, whether that be with actual artefacts and advertising in their window to encourage people to come in and spend, or helping people with the process if they have no issue, and understanding how they can signpost back to our support services. And again, digital first, but with significant back office functionality and back office support available in terms of telephone line support, in terms of the initial registration of members of the public, but also then once the cards are issued, and requirements from the prepaid card providers to support customer services, as well as supporting the fraud and error management issues that we've already talked about.
Okay, thank you. But just, I suppose, in relation to what it can be spent on, is there any more information on that particular?
No, I don't think, Chair, at the moment that we've finalised the list. We are trying to ensure that it's supporting the retail sector and the wholesale sector. But I mean, in terms of exclusions, we really haven't got to the final list of that. But clearly, in terms of, as I said previously, cash withdrawals and gambling purposes. But more importantly, general online services, general online purchases. The intention is we do want people to spend it. Let's use the term bricks and mortar. The driving force behind all of this, by getting people footfall back into the shops, trying to encourage local businesses and build that and try and rebuild the high streets in both cities and towns right across Northern Ireland.
And I suppose just a final question for myself before bringing in other members. Is there going to be additional administrative costs to the rollout of the scheme?
We're expecting that the administration costs will all be covered within the cost of the overall scheme at the moment. But I mean, this is a project which will stand up and be stood down within this current financial year. So there'll be no recurring costs for the department.
Okay. Thank you. Can I bring in John Stewart, please?
Thanks, Chair. Folks, thanks for the presentation so far. As the Chair's already said, there's a massive amount of public interest in this, and even when we shared the basic information that we had last week, I can say that there were hundreds of comments asking me questions that I still don't have answers to, and maybe you do, and hopefully we'll get a couple of those today. I am a little bit surprised. It's 5.5 months since this was launched, or at least announced, and it does still feel like it's in the conceptual stage, which is a bit disappointing, and maybe that's just because no one had been tasked with it during those 5 months and we're just getting to that point. And I fully understand the reasons for the delays in terms of rollout because of the environment that we're in. It's about getting that right. But I hope maybe on the back of this, when we get the next presentation, there will be a few more bones on that. It needs to be, though, I know it's going to be hard to control, but it must wherever possible, do what it sets out to do, and that's support the high street. And it would be really, really, really frustrating to see the big businesses that have done so well during the pandemic benefit from this en masse. And I don't know how we go about doing that, whether it is through an education campaign or an advertising campaign, but I would be so upset if I thought Amazon and Tesco's and Sainsbury's were benefiting from this. I know they play an important role within our towns and cities, but they have done exceptionally well, where the independent, indigenous retail and service outlet has not. They've been crippled. So whatever we can do to direct it towards that through advertising or in terms of how this is scripted, then I think that has to be done. Just as a couple of questions, so things I'm getting asked, how long do you assume it will take from the mass amount of applications that you get to whenever these cards have been rolled out through the letterboxes? Secondly, are you going to put a limit on the time frame of how the way gift cards are usually 6 months? Is this going to be available and used up to Christmas, for example, this year, or is that going to be limited by time frame? I'll give you those two for now, and if I've got time, I'll come back.
Okay, so maybe, John, what I'll do here is I'll get Dave to answer the two questions that you've asked directly. But let me assure you, come back to your opening comments, that whilst it's 5 months, there has been uncertainty and clearly in terms of both the health, the pandemic, but also in terms of just getting final agreement. But the department hasn't been sitting on its hands, and working with the SIB, we do have a fairly clear idea now, and we have a series of processes in place which we've been waiting to get the green light. Now we've got that, we'll be able to move straight into procurement and getting the design finalised. So let me assure you that there's been work ongoing, and that will take that forward very quickly. Dave, you want to speak about the two particular questions?
Certainly, yes. In terms of the first question, just to be clear, as soon as a citizen or a member of the public registers on the portal, we're validating that registration in real time, so they'll get real feedback in terms of where they were, and we'll be able to manage the expectation. But our assumption is that within a number of days after that, we will be passing those registrations across the prepaid card provider. We have a fairly tight planned rollout in terms of a 6 or 7 week rollout to roll out the 1.4 million in potential cards. So people will start seeing them within days rather than months. So that's the first part of the question. Some of that has some complexities around it in terms of how we want to roll that out, whether that be by age groups or cohorts or region, and we're still working that through, working with colleagues and working with the Minister to confirm that approach. The second piece is that technically the scheme will run for the financial year, but the intention is that we will run the scheme over the period that the research indicates, which initially at this point is August through to kind of October, November time, not displacing the Christmas peak in spend that's proposed. But we do have the ability then to mop up, and some of the research has shown that whenever there is money left on the cards and people don't spend all of the money at the same time, that we would have the ability to sweep that up in a further campaign supported by additional public messaging to support that behaviour to drive spend on the high street.
Okay, thanks for that, Dave. That's very informative. Just my last point, if I get a chance to come back in, I will. You mentioned about telephone. I'm conscious of what the chair says about accessing this. There'll be many people this will just be a gift to do, and others that will be very intimidated about even the notion of finance and online applications. So working with statutory groups, as you already alluded to, is going to be so important. The likes of the local phone call services for the aged and stuff in the local communities and the councils. But will you be able to apply for this over the telephone?
Yes, you will.
You will, okay.
You will very simply. Somebody will fill in the form on your behalf.
No problem. Okay, well, if I can make, just reiterate my point, I think this has to do what it says, and I know that's your intention, but it's how we'll all happily play a role in whatever it needs to be done. This needs to shore up our independent high street. And I think if it does that, it'll be amazing, but I would really be regretting it if it goes anywhere but that.
I guess, yeah. Just to reassure the committee in terms of the public relation and marketing activity that's going on, significant effort being put into the fairly complex messaging that needs to go out to guide the public to spend on the high street and supporting the independent retailers, and a real focus on the creative branding that's come back so far around that high street, and actually showcasing regionally as well some of those examples, and really creating a sense of involvement in this part of the economy with the high street retailers and supporting those independent local businesses.
No worries. Well, can I thank you, Matt, just from myself for the effort so far in rolling this out, and I don't think the committee will be found wanting. If there's any consultation role you want us to play, we're all very engaged with our constituents, and we're hearing many questions being asked and much feedback. So at any stage during this, before rollout, I'd be happily feed into that again. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, John. And just to pick up on John's final point there around ensuring it's accessible, and I suppose it does just show the public interest in this. While we are on air here this morning, I've received an email from the RNIB about asking that this will be accessible to blind and partially sighted people, so can just ask for assurances in relation to that.
Yeah, I think we'll give you assurance, Mr. Chair, that we will pick up with the RNIB and get them involved in the advisory group to make sure that that group of people are looked after properly.
Thank you. Can we bring Gary into the spotlight, please?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks everyone for your presentation. Obviously, it's very useful. It's answered quite a few queries already that I would have had. I think it is very welcome news that we've seen progress to get us to this point. Last week, I, along with the Minister, met with the London Dairy Chamber of Commerce, and it was very clear when we speak to them that the timing is very important in terms of when this is done. It shouldn't be rushed, but also it shouldn't be too late. It needs to be got right. And I think that when you talk about the end of the summer, that's very much in line with what I'm hearing in terms of feedback. And of course, you're obviously conducting research, but as MLAs, we obviously, our research as well is basically speaking to businesses, and I'm happy to feed that back to yourselves and support you in doing that. I do agree with the points that have already been made around accessibility. I think that's an issue that has been raised. I know the majority of people will no doubt be able to access it digitally, and they'll be happy to do so, but we do need to be mindful of others who may not have that capacity or ability to be able to do it in that form. So I look forward to hearing that. A question for me, and in a way, I do want to say it is important that the scheme, the voucher, is accessible to as widely as many businesses as possible. I take that point, but what we don't want to see is everybody rushing to one massive retailer, which is done very well. At the same time, what I'm hearing from the high street is that it's important that, so if you want to go get a pair of glasses with it, for example, that's okay. If you want to go get a pair of shoes, it needs to be that wide ranging. We shouldn't be limiting people. The one question I want to ask is around the using it locally. Is there going to be any restrictions in terms? Obviously, I'm from London Dairy, so I want people to spend it here. Is there anything to stop people, for example, using it? Can it be used anywhere in the UK? Can it be used, for example, in the Republic of Ireland? How is that limited? And maybe you could just speak to that for me.
Dave, do you want to pick that up?
I guess there were a couple of elements to that. The first one is that we can tie down spend to geographically being in Northern Ireland. Okay, so it's only in bricks and mortar outlets at this point in Northern Ireland. We have the ability to control that. Once you start to get down to a lower level of granularity, that becomes very difficult to administer and a bit more restrictive. But what we are hoping to do is mirror some of those restrictions, or align those restrictions to the advertising and marketing and messaging campaign, and the ability to make that local. And that kind of initial strapline at the start of the programme was around spend local. That may change in terms of what it's called, but that concept and those objectives are the same.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I think people, we need to trust people as well. I think people have been very good throughout the pandemic, and I think that people will use their own heads and decide, look, let us support our local retailers who have had such a hard time. So, no, thanks for that, and very much appreciate the update. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Can we bring in Sinead, please?
Thank you for the briefing so far. I probably just want to kind of explore a wee bit more about the impact assessments that have taken place in relation to this scheme. Obviously, the constituents that I serve here in the Northwest are very much welcoming this. And I would concur with the observations of John Stewart. It's really important that this does what it says in the tin, that it's a high street voucher scheme, and that it is spent locally and it is spent in our mortars, particularly those businesses that were closed down during the pandemic. And if it does that, then it will be very successful. But I just want to understand the impact that has been conducted on this, and refer to other areas that have already done this in Jersey and Isle of Man and etc. etc. Can you just give me an idea of what the results were in the impact assessment? What were the results in relation to creating jobs, maintaining jobs, and driving the economy forward, and the direct impact and the indirect impact, and how it's going to underpin our GDP? Because I'm really aware that £140 million is half of the money for the economic recovery action plan. It's been spent in the scheme, so it has to actually deliver for every citizen in Northern Ireland by driving the economy forward. So it would be good to have transparency in relation to your research on that, and how do we then assess whether it has been successful based on your predictions?
Okay, Sinead, so let me just sort of give you a quick answer to part of that question, and then I'm going to bring Keith in to give some more background information in terms of the other schemes and how we're going to go forward with the assessment. I think it's really important to understand that this scheme is not a job creation scheme, right? This job is about supporting local businesses, sort of, move forward, trying to ensure that the high street is seeing increased footfall and seeing people coming back into those local businesses. But it's not directly there to actually increase jobs per se. It's about pump priming the economy and trying to help businesses move forward. Keith, do you want to comment in terms of the experiences in even Malta and Jersey, and also then in terms of our economic impact?
Just briefly, there's research ongoing on this, Sinead, but indicative findings from the Jersey scheme would suggest that about 78% of the spend was really into the sort of retail and hospitality areas. So that was a good outcome, and that the target market was sort of by and large achieved. In terms of the multiplier effect, I think we're working roughly at the minute for about every pound that was spent on the scheme would roughly get you somewhere between maybe an additional 45p to 56p. So when you equate that up, there is evidence of quite a strong multiplier effect, and therefore additional benefit of the scheme. In terms of, as Tommy said there, the intention is that if we get the marketing right, and we get the scheme to land with the retailers in the hospitality sector appropriately, the feedback that we've had so far from those sectors is that it will definitely be well received. It's what is needed now, and provided it lands at the right time, and the evidence is showing that would be at the end of August, get into that autumn period, that alignment should ensure that there's the biggest return in this as we can possibly get. So that's where we are.
Sinead, in terms of the work that we've done to date, we have developed a business case around the spend, okay, and that work's ongoing. Clearly, we can't finalise that business case until we get to a point of understanding how much we're spending on procurement, how much we're spending on support. So all of that work is rolling at the moment. The things that we have to do as civil servants in terms of ensuring proper use of public monies, so we are taking forward. However, we also need to recognise this is pretty innovative, this is really taking place anywhere else in the UK, so it's, in some ways we have to, we're taking some examples elsewhere, seeing the potential benefits, and we're rolling forward with it. We will be, as we roll through the scheme, getting on a weekly basis or monthly basis feedback from the technology as to where the spend's taking place, what types of shops, how much is being spent, right? And we will be using that in order to try and do the impact assessment. But the intention is that we will be doing that as we go through the process, because we are required, as you know, to do a post-project evaluation. But we will be completing our business case, and that will be available in due course in terms of the impact, in terms of the success of delivering the objectives of this scheme.
The other point just to make there, the evidence would show, Sinead, just for completeness, that from Jersey, that the majority of the spend actually occurred in the first 3 or 4 weeks of the scheme being launched.
Yeah, and there's another question that I wanted to ask. The voucher scheme, how long do you think that the vouchers are going to be applicable and alive? Because it has to have a beginning and it has to have an end. So how long do you think that is going to last?
So as Dave was outlining earlier, I mean, the scheme itself has to be completed by March of next year because it's a 1-year funding cycle. So we have to get it completed. We're trying to find the optimum point at which to commence the scheme, and that's probably at the moment, preliminary research is showing probably around about the end of August, beginning the early autumn. Now, clearly we don't want to run into the Christmas period, so we're probably looking at that sort of window of that 3 months. But people won't have spent all of the money. There will always be people with cards with £3 here and £4 there. So we'll probably come back in the new year to try and wrap that up, because that will end up being unspent money, and we'll try and get all of that spent through the financial year. But we are intending that the scheme will be closed and finished by the end of March next year.
Okay, and in relation, it has been asked earlier, but it just wasn't really clear. In relation to the cost of administration, obviously the cost of the portal, cost of actually getting the money out, and then for the retailers to claim back the money. I mean, it's quite a significant administration. And will it be your department, or will you be seconding that out to the private sector in order to deliver the scheme?
Okay, so the money's coming to the department, so the money will be within the department, but then we'll be handing it over. We will then be using that money through the providers. And Dave, do you want to say something about how that will work? But also, can you just give some reassurance to Sinead about the administration of this in terms of from a technical viewpoint?
Sure, and I guess not to repeat the overall architecture of the solution, but very simply that the portal is a fairly straightforward piece of technology, making sure it's simple to use, simple to manage and simple to administer. That's really about a registration process and some data matching expertise in the back end and some smart technology to allow us to ensure that we're giving the money to the right people. Once we've got that registration piece done, we are passing very basic details to allow a prepaid card provider to send and issue the card. They will take over responsibility for the customer service at that point, in terms a bit like if you get a card from the bank. If you have an issue with that, if you need to enable that card, there will actually be a way of doing that over the telephone or with the phone, but that will be done by the prepaid card provider themselves and part of the standard service delivery that they give. Back to the previous question, the prepaid card provider will also give us daily reports in terms of uptake, issues, customer service calls, spend by merchant code, but also by geography, which is really important to me as we run the program, because we can actually have the opportunity to tailor the messaging to allow us to encourage spend by region, by geography, or if the behaviours aren't what we want to be seeing, we can tweak that messaging to allow us to do that. In terms of administration, Tommy, and just back to that specific question, we are working very closely with colleagues in Digital Transformation Services and NI Direct. Some really good modelling and understanding through the vaccination programme in terms of the level of type of support that is required. And we're working with them in a user design piece to understand that journey from start to finish and make sure we have the appropriate level of support there, but very comfortable that it's within the scope of the business case that's there and the costs that have already been outlined. So comfortable with the level of administration support we required. The importance of the digital design to make sure we make that seamless for as many people as possible, but recognising and lessons from the vaccination programme will show that people in Northern Ireland like to lift the phone first, and the ability to deliver that customer service and explain to them how to do that, as well as the potential to roll out activation as part of the marketing campaign to get out into towns and cities to allow people to do that. But from
sorry, Dave, I can't understand how 1.4 million are going to get the card and it's going to cost 140 million. And I don't see where the wriggle room is there for the administration and the complexity of everything else. It's just that I don't understand it yet because we haven't been given any transparency around any of it.
And I guess for the committee, happy to come back and provide an additional level of detail. We are in the beginning of procurement. A lot of those numbers are based on pre-market engagement and understanding, for example, the costs of running a scheme. But we understand well, and we think we understand the prepaid card provider pretty well in terms of the cost to do that and manage that. And that's an off-the-shelf price, and there's no movement in it or anything in that. The bits around the edges are the management of the scheme, the NI direct costs. In terms of what that looks like, and we're working with them at the moment to get to the final stage. And as we work through the final versions of the business case, we will reflect any changes there. But there are no major risks coming out to say there are line items here that we haven't seen or concerns about the level of administration specifically.
Okay.
I hope that reassures you that we are trying to drive the costs, keep the costs down by using the digital solution. Okay, and clearly, as Dave says, we're still refining that. But it is work in progress, but there's no sort of burning platforms at the moment for us in terms of looking forward. Hopefully we'll be able to get this in line. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Shane.
Thanks. And so just to go back to the point about I think he says, Keith, that this would generate an additional 45p on every pound spent. So just what is the expected benefit of the scheme overall in terms of that back to the economy, and what does that compare like to other places where similar schemes have been rolled out?
I think, Sinead, as Dave alluded to, we need to sort of just finalise those numbers in the business case and the projections in the business case, but it's very difficult to actually forecast out accurately what the overall benefit for the NI scheme is going to be. I mean, we are benchmarking against what we've seen in other jurisdictions to sort of inform that assessment. But I'm happy to revert back to the committee on that issue if we can sort of present that as we sort of we move forward with sort of clarifying some of the scope of the scheme. We can come back on that.
Okay, thanks for that. Can we bring Stuart into the spotlight, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the answers to the questions so far. I've got a few more questions for you in relation to this. First of all, is there a plan for minimum spend at any one transaction? Because I know there are a few retailers, and I'm not sure how legitimate it is, but if you're using a plastic card, they will say to you there's a minimum spend of £5 or something like that. It happens in a lot of fast food takeaway places. So we need to know whether I can literally go in and spend 10p in a shop and do that using my card. Then, so just on that, continuing on that theme, where does that put us in relation to hospitality? Can I spend in a restaurant? Can I spend it on a takeaway? Because many of those are very local businesses, and although some of them will have had takeaway service and click and collect at the moment, but a lot of them, there are lots of cafes and restaurants just simply didn't open at all, and they need to have the opportunity around all of this. Next area is around the whole issue of fraud and scamming, and indeed an illegal currency being created by the cards. Can the cards be stolen and used? Can the cards be given to other people and used? How do I secure the card, and how secure is the system in relation to all of that? The last thing you want to do is see the cards being used as some sort of street currency, and we need to be assured that they won't become that, particularly for paying off money lenders and the like. And then two other areas just to finish off, Chair. One is, and I've been asked this by a number of people, can I get my card? Can I donate the money on my card to a charity, for example, a local food bank? But there will be. How would you get on to it?
Stuart, you're breaking up a wee bit. We didn't catch the last couple of sentences there. If you maybe want to repeat.
Sorry, the last bit was around can I donate my card to a local charity, How could I do that? Could I, for example, donate the card to a food bank or something like that? And indeed, just going on from that, if I can't make a donation, can I use the card in the charity shop? Okay, thank you.
Okay, Stuart, some really interesting questions, and some of that I have to say, some of the details of that we haven't worked through. But let's just try and pick up some of the questions, because we have answers to some of them, but it's just some of the finer details that we haven't worked through yet. Dave, do you want to speak about in terms of how much and issues like that and fraud?
Okay, so without avoiding the question, some of this is still subject to procurement. We have a number of providers from a prepaid card provider perspective who will have terms and conditions, and there will be an element of that. But actually, the objective at the moment is there will be no minimum spend. There isn't any indication that there will be a minimum spend. The second is, and I was going to give you a sense of what other schemes have seen in terms of what they've seen in terms of numbers of transactions. And they have seen spend, and I think Keith alluded to the fact earlier that we've seen a significant impact. I think it's like 78% across retail and hospitality and some of the other schemes. But the average transaction was around £28. So people using the card 3 or 4 times rather than a one-off discretionary purpose. One of the other pieces around the procurement is understanding 4 different providers on the framework will have different ways of charging us for that service, and making sure that when you spend £28, it's not really 30, because there's a fee on that, is part of the procurement process, and understanding the cost of administering this. And there are very different delivery models in that space. So it will be a prepaid card, which can be used on a card machine. Tommy has said there are only limited restrictions at the moment. We're still working through some of that. So there is the potential that if somebody has a card machine, that you could go into a charity shop and purchase in the same way that you would shop in any street, if that's what you want to do with it. And as long as they have the contactless card infrastructure there to allow you to do that.
I think it's important that, Stuart, we're also recognising that as a department, we're not trying to restrict people in terms of their choice within the overall context. So we're trying to set a policy context or a policy framework of supporting local businesses. But within that framework, we're really giving people choices, because everyone's lives are all different and all people have different needs at different times. So really it's a matter for them to make those choices. We will facilitate as far as possible, as long as it's consistent with the policy framework that we're setting, in which the Minister has signed off as being what she wants to achieve. That's really where we're trying to go with it. So getting down into the detail as to whether or not you can pay a food bank or donate to a food bank or ban a charity shop, in principle, we would see there'd be no reason against that, right? It's within the context of trying to support local businesses, and that's what we're trying to do.
And just
around fraud and error, I think that that is an area that we are very mindful of. We're bringing in some specialist support to work with the providers to make sure about how we ensure that, because they have a set of standard terms that will protect us in terms of fraud. And what we're just trying to make sure is that they're using public money and that we've got a robust system of fraud and error to protect the use of the cards.
Thank you. In fact, just very finally, Chair, you've said that you will have a number of key stakeholders that you'll be working with. Will that include the High Street Task Force?
It will, yes, Stuart, is the simple answer. We've had some engagement already with retail, hospitality, and we're just starting to widen out and make sure it's a complete view, as well as those other voluntary and other stakeholder groups. So happy to share when we have that full stakeholder matrix done.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Stuart. Can we bring John O'Dowd into the spotlight, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation thus far. As others have said, there's quite a significant amount of work yet to be done in regards to this policy. The business case is not complete, procurement's not complete, the finer details of the rollout are not complete. So I would be pleasantly surprised if this hits the high street in August of this year. It may well be that people use this scheme for their Christmas shopping rather than August, because once you get into procurement, and all those things, it can get very, as you know, only too well, it can get very, very complicated. The other thing that I'm slightly surprised at, if not concerned at, is when the Chair mentioned to you that the RNAB Institute of the Blind had been in contact
you said contact them. Surely your equality scheme should have flagged up the need to engage with groups who may be marginalised as a result of anything.
Okay, so John, let me go back then in terms of your opening comments. In terms of the business case is 95% complete. In terms of the procurement lines have all been set up and there's been pre-engagement already taking place. And in terms of the planning, the plans are already there in terms of rolling forward. However, we couldn't move forward to moving these towards conclusion until we got executive agreement to move to the next stage. We received that last Thursday, and now we're moving into full implementation mode. So I would expect that once the procurement's complete, we will be able to finalise the OBC, largely speaking, to a point whereby it would be then completed at that point. We're expecting that we've got an estimated 3-month timeline for the procurement to be completed and the cards ready to flow. So that's all coming into line with being ready to be rolled at the end of August into September. Now, at the same time, we're still working through this. So I'm not going to hang my life on it. That's our plan and that's what we're working. We've got a team, a project together, and we're trying to move at pace in order to get delivery on that issue. Okay. And the second part of your question was around.
I was surprised that when the chair mentioned to you that the RANIB had been in contact, that it appeared to be that was the first instance where you were going to. Maybe I'm wrong. Sorry, no.
What I meant to say was I was sure that they were. I mean, I don't know who's actually in the advisory group at the moment. Okay, but it is representatives of the voluntary and community sector would all be there now. Taking that into account, I would imagine they will represent all of the main groups representing people with disabilities or those who are disadvantaged. But I haven't got the list with me at the moment. What I was just trying to give the chair was a reassurance that we make sure that.
Okay. Then, in terms of the main question I want to ask, how will this impact on anybody who's on benefits? A significant number of people have lost their jobs or are now claiming universal credit and other benefits. If they apply for this £100 scheme, will that impact on their benefits?
John, I can't answer that question directly for you, but I think the intention is that it would not be deemed as being income, and so therefore the purpose of universal credit or other income-related benefits, it wouldn't count, okay? But what I will do is I will check that for you, because clearly if it's going to impact on people's benefit system, I think that would be totally, that would be counterproductive. But I just haven't got around to that particular detail, but I will come back to you. But I think certainly the policy intention is it would not be deemed as being income.
And just my last point is this: in terms of the other schemes you have looked at, has there been any evidence of the unintended consequences of price rises as a result of the scheme being introduced into the market?
Haven't seen any evidence of that in both Malta. In Malta, I mean, they found it, and it was specifically around the issue around the retail sector and hospitality, right? And they found it so successful that they came with a second run at it in the autumn. So I don't think that they've seen there was naturally a price impact in terms of prices going up, but they did see that it reinforced jobs in the market and allowed them to maintain confidence in the sector. And businesses were very supportive, as they are in Northern Ireland. We've had quite a number of people involved in the retail sector and hospitality sector welcoming this scheme and are working very closely with the department and with Dave in trying to make sure it's a success.
Okay, thanks, Tommy. And if we could get clarification related to that.
I'll do that. Yeah, I will do. Yeah, okay.
Thanks for that. And it would be very useful for us to get some clarity around what John has raised there in relation to the voucher, because we have seen some issues with the £500 payments to health workers, for example, and that being potentially taxed and everything else. So I think we do need some clarity on that issue. Thank you. Can we bring in Claire, please?
Thank you, Chair. My understanding of the scheme in terms of what you were working towards before is that this will be a prepaid debit card that will be used within the confines of Northern Ireland. I think you might find yourself getting into difficulty if you started providing a prescriptive list of where it can and can't be spent. So the idea around it was to ensure marketing campaigns so that people were getting more value from the amount of money on the card rather than where they were specifically spending it. So to encourage independent businesses, for example, to offer 2-for-1 offers or something like that, so that people were spending it maybe more wisely would be a way of putting it. So I suppose I'd be keen to understand, how you will market that to smaller businesses, across Northern Ireland, and it also, gives rise to the questions around, can this be spent within hospitality and restaurants and all of that. Also, will it be able to be used for part payment? So maybe where something is £200, could someone put that, as a contribution and then make it up with the rest of their money? Will it be a contactless type card? Particularly with COVID, a lot of people are now doing that, and the figures around that have risen. I'm also concerned about point of sale issues. Have we considered that and the impact on businesses and what that will mean for them? But yeah, just need to hear your thoughts on those various things I've raised.
Okay. Dave, do you want to come with some of those and I'll pick up?
Yes, sure. I guess if I actually start at the end, Claire, if that's okay, in terms of the point of sale, one of the key elements around deciding around a prepaid card was making sure there was no infrastructure investment required by the majority of businesses, okay? And the retail and the hospitality telling us 99% of people can take contactless payment now in line with the COVID guidance. So that was one of the big drivers for a prepaid card versus voucher side of this, that it is just like using a debit card as you talk to, and that is correct. There are limited restrictions still working through some of those in terms of policy, but the big driving factor here is the media and marketing campaign, getting people involved. And it's not just a get out and spend, it's a fairly complex messaging campaign, and we've brought in some third-party support to help us on that. And the initial creatives are really about encouraging people to recognise that they're part of recovery, and they're recognising local independent retailers and choosing carefully and putting some responsibility on members of the public to choose where they need to spend that. So from a marketing perspective, and again, we'll come back, we're working through the initial creative designs in what they would look like and the messaging along that. But part of that brief is making sure that it's flexible so we can respond to market conditions. We can change that if we're seeing behaviours that aren't in line with what we want to do, and also if we're seeing spend patterns or non-spend patterns that we want to initiate and drive stuff through. In terms of the part payment and those things, it is like a prepaid debit card, so they can choose to do that and make that, as long as the retailer, I guess, understands that it's 2 transactions rather than 1. They can't spend more than the £100. They can't load more money onto the card. But apart from that, there are very limited restrictions in terms of what they can do in the actual business itself.
Another question, Chair, if you don't mind, I would ask is, what will the registration process look like? What information will be gathered? Are there any prerequisites to that? And I would imagine it's 18 plus. Is there a maximum number of people within a household that can apply for the card? How's that data going to be collected? Where's all the kind of GDPR around it as well? Will it require people to be on the electoral register? Just keen to hear what the registration process looks like.
Tommy, are you happy?
Go ahead, Dave. Answer this one.
Okay. So there's a number of elements to that question. I guess the first one is, yes, it's digital first. We've already talked about the fact about making the registration process as accessible as possible. So if we forget the fact that there will be people on the phones or people face to face maybe doing this, the registration process we're trying to keep as simple as possible, and it's likely to be name, address, date of birth. That is the kind of limited information that we're looking. Now, that's not saying that there are not other prerequisites. So when we capture that information, what we're trying to do is validate that person exists on other government data sets. Electoral Office is one of those. But there are other data sets that we're also looking at, HMRC data sets, and we're also looking at health and care number and all the work that's going on in the vaccination program to clean up some of the data there. What I'm trying to do is get a confidence rating from that data matching exercise to say that this person hasn't tried to register before at this address, and that we know them, and we're confident that we can associate that person with that address, and we can therefore then pass that information off to the prepaid card provider for processing of the card. In terms of GDPR and all of those things, obviously the application, the registration portal it falls under the data privacy impact assessment for the department, and working with the department and NI Direct to make sure that we're very clear up front about what we're capturing, how we're capturing, and what we're doing with that data. We're only holding the data for the purposes of the scheme and for the execution of the scheme. We will hold it inside an NI Direct infrastructure. So in terms of security, in terms of data protection and all of those things, we fall under the normal public sector guidance and guidelines and standards. We only pass name and address information to the prepaid card provider to allow them to process the card itself. So from a GDPR perspective, we're working through all of the elements of that, but relatively comfortable in terms of what we're doing. We're capturing that information for the purposes of executing the scheme. So yes, there will be some prerequisites, and just going back to the other part of your question around electoral office, and already engaged with electoral office around getting the data set is okay, but we're in the middle of probably election season and all of those things, and people starting to sign up. We've got other questions around what happens if I'm not on the register at the moment, and what happens if I become 18 during the scheme as opposed to after or before the scheme and I'm not on the electorate. So working through all of those, and the answer is not any one of those things. It is a combination of all of those data sets, working with all of those people, working with the electoral office to get different snapshots of that as we go. And I just alluded to the last part of your question, which is around the 18, and the conversation around where is that cut off and the policy. We're still working through that, but certainly working with the minister, there was a view that 18 while the registration or application process is open. So if I turn 18, once the scheme has been launched, up until the point of closing the registration, then that is valid, rather than putting a line in the sand now and saying today, if you're 18 now, it's okay, but not tomorrow. But again, come back and confirm the policy decisions around that. Those are just some of the options that we're working through.
Okay. And I think you're in the middle of that, we've got a debate going on between the policy side and the delivery side, in the sense that clearly Dave wants to keep it as simple as possible to ensure that we are covering everything we need. But from a policy perspective, we need to also understand who's applying, all of our other requirements from a policy perspective. So how do we get the balance in the middle of that? And as Dave, one of the big questions which is kicking around is what's the cutoff date? Right? When what about they've said who they're 17 and a half? But there will be legislation, there will be regulations brought forward to authorise these payments, and that will all go into the Assembly as well in due course.
Okay. Would I maybe suggest as well that if there was a window in which to spend this and people were going to fall 18 within that window, you maybe would consider that as part of the kind of considerations in and around that, because I'd be conscious that, people who are 18 years old, maybe even towards the end of those 6 months or whatever, if that's what it's going to be, maybe wouldn't have access to it in the same way, just to add another layer to it. I do think it's interesting in relation to the electoral register, and indeed, outside of voting, if you're applying for a mortgage, it's appropriate that you're on the electoral register, and it is kind of conducive to your credit, ability and all those types of things. And maybe it'll encourage more people to get on the register and vote, which as a politician, we're all happy to see. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. And just to ask, has consideration been given to extending it to 16 and 17-year-olds? Because you could have young people who are not in education or training and who, may have responsibilities as well.
At the moment, Chair, it's being looked upon as being 18, but certainly that'll be a policy issue that we will bring up with the Minister in due course.
Okay, I think that would be useful. Thanks. Can we bring Christopher into the spotlight, please?
Hello there, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Just before I go, I can assure you that walking stick behind me was here when I came here. It's not mine. I think it actually belonged to Mitchell McLaughlin. Promise you it's not mine. I'm old at heart, but I'm not that old. Just seen that in the shot. Now, I tell you what it is, the issue around the stores that people can go to, move that out of shot. That's better. The issue that the stores that people can go to with the vouchers, obviously John had mentioned earlier about an awful lot of people have clearly lost jobs and what have you as a consequence of where we're at. For a family struggling to buy, £100 will probably go a lot further at a major retailer than it would necessarily in some of the independent stores. So I just want to know, I understand the purpose of this. Some of those major retailers are also on high streets. I just want to assure people that, if they're going to get access to this money and they're really in need, and what they really want to do is buy, bulk supplies of food, basically, for their family, that there won't be an issue there and that there will be no particular comeback upon them for doing so.
I think, Christopher, I try and give you reassurance that at the moment the policy intent is to, again, provide freedom, provide choice for families and for individuals to make the decisions within the policy context, that we're trying to support local businesses. And if that local business happens to be a co-op on a main street, or it happens to be a Spar, or it happens to be a local Tesco's, well, then that's a matter for the family to meet their needs, as long as they're spending locally in bricks and mortar type shops, rather than spending it online on Amazon. So again, that's the sort of broad context that we're providing at the moment. I think the second aspect of it is it becomes really technically difficult for us to start to differentiate between individual shops and where do you say the scale of those shops, where do they become a big wholesaler or a big retailer, and where are they still small? Whereas making sure that they can't do it online is a separation that makes it technically easier for us to do that. But I think the more important point is this is really for families, this is for individuals to make their decisions in supporting local businesses and spending local.
It's like a lot of these things, the more sort of means testing is attempted, or the more control is attempted around, the less the impact will become.
And going back to Sinead's concerns earlier, it also becomes then more administratively expensive to run, and we want to avoid that as well.
So we want the money out the door and in the till. That's what we want.
Very much.
Okay,
Keith, you're muted.
Okay, so on mute, is he?
Keith, I can't hear you. Oh, no, I can hear you now, yeah.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Just to sort of say that, if and it is about consumer choice at the end of the day, consumer choice that will be directed and by hopefully some strong messaging and branding, as we said earlier. But fundamentally, if that consumer chooses to spend £100 in the supermarket under the circumstances which you've just described, there's nothing to say that they won't go and spend £50 or go and spend £60 out of their separate income on another shop in the high street. And from a modelling perspective and an analytical perspective, it's very difficult to extrapolate that out. So to an extent, and this plays back to the previous point about what is the benefit of the scheme, there are a lot of difficulties and barriers in trying to definitively say if we spend £145 million on this scheme, we are going to get back as a return on that investment. For these sort of reasons, I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Christopher. And I think that's all of our questions for now. So look, thank you very much for the briefing, and we're going to pick up on some of the points and maybe communicate back to yourselves in relation to that. But it has been very useful.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the opportunity this morning, and we look forward to being back in the future to brief the committee again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And members, we're going to move on to our next briefing, and then we'll come back after that to agree some actions out of this. But our officials are here for the next briefing, so we don't want to keep people waiting too long. So item number 5 is our briefing from officials from the Department for Infrastructure on regional planning. There is a clerk's memo at page 106 of your pack. The committee's micro-inquiry report on the macroeconomic recovery is at page 109, and then our micro-inquiry report on the energy strategy is at page 127. There's an updated clerk's memo at page 12 of your table papers, and which includes a written briefing from the Department for Infrastructure, and then there is a written briefing paper at page 12 of your table papers from Department for Infrastructure. So just to remind members, during our recent micro-inquiries, a number of planning-related issues were raised by stakeholders, and the purpose of this briefing is to hear directly from senior planning officials leading on regional planning policy on how it can support and enable economic development. So I'd like to welcome to our meeting this morning, and thank you very much for agreeing to attend our committee. Angus Kerr, who is Chief Planner and Director of Regional Planning at DFI, Alistair Beggs, who is Director of Strategic Planning Directorate at DFI, Scott Symington, who is Senior Principal, Regional Planning Directorate at DFI. So if I hand over to yourselves to make an opening statement, and then we'll open it up to members for some questions.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the invitation to brief the committee on planning issues and particularly respond to some of the issues that have been raised by stakeholders during your recent micro inquiries. As you said, I'm Angus Cairn, Chief Planner in DFI, and Alistair and Scott are joining me here today. And we really do welcome the opportunity to set out the role of the planning system, particularly in facilitating energy development and delivering infrastructure which supports energy needs of business, community and citizens. And hopefully what we say today will address some of the issues that have come up in your inquiry. I propose to set out the wider planning policy context and also brief you on some measures underway to improve the planning system. And then Alistair will update you on some of the work councils are taking forward in preparing local development plans and also on some of the big regionally significant energy projects that we're dealing with in the department. And as you've said, we're very much happy to take questions. Members will be aware that the planning system has been transformed in recent years following executive decisions to reform the system and to transfer responsibility for the majority of planning functions to local councils in 2015. Councils are now responsible for preparing local development plans for their areas and for determining the majority of planning applications, while we in DFI retain responsibility for regional planning policy and legislation and for determining regionally significant development applications. And that two-tier planning system is very much similar to the systems in all the other jurisdictions in these islands. The planning system provides a balanced framework for furthering sustainable development in the long-term public interest through integration and balancing of complex social, economic and environmental factors when placemaking and taking planning decisions. The system has played an important role in helping to achieve the exceedance of the 40% target for electricity consumed being generated from renewable energy sources, and figures indicate that the 12-month period between January and December of 2020, 49.2% of total electricity consumption was generated from renewable sources in Northern Ireland, with 84.9% from wind. The Strategic Planning Policy Statement, or as we call the SPPS, published in 2015, provides the policy framework for a wide range of planning matters, but particularly renewable energy. And the aim of the renewable energy policy is to facilitate the siting of renewable energy generating facilities in appropriate locations within the built and natural environment in order to achieve Northern Ireland's renewable energy targets. And to realise the benefits of renewable energy without compromising other environmental assets of acknowledged importance. On the 21st of April, Minister Mallon announced a review of the strategic planning policy in the SPPS for renewable and low carbon energy to ensure the department's planning policy in this area remains up to date, robust and fit for purpose. This is being undertaken in the context of the climate crisis, but also, of course, in the context of the energy strategy which DFE are preparing. As with all new policy development, there will be extensive engagement with stakeholders and the public as part of this process, and a key challenge will be to facilitate renewable and low carbon energy development which is acceptable to our communities and also protects the environment and furthering sustainable development in the long-term public interest. Alistair is going to explain the local development plan programme in a little more detail later on, including the requirement for local development plans to take account of the strategic policy and guidance which we prepare in DFI. We very much welcome the work currently being undertaken by the Department for Economy in bringing forward a new energy strategy for Northern Ireland. And we as officials have been actively involved, contributing in particular to 2 of the 5 thematic work groups, namely power and transport. On the planning side, we have been engaging mostly through the Power Working Group on areas of mutual interest on a regular basis. DFI recognises that the planning system is often the place where differing and opposing interests meet for the first time, for example, local environmental interests versus economic interests, and is therefore likely to be the area where any conflict arises. Planning may not always be able to reconcile competing interests, but there is an ample opportunity for stakeholders to participate in the new local development plan process at councils so that all interests are taken into account over the period of a 15-year plan. In relation to specific development proposals, DFI will continue to encourage developers to engage in pre-application discussions and meaningful pre-application community consultation in order to seek to address any community concerns prior to the submission of proposed planning applications. In furthering sustainable development in the long-term public interest, the planning system will help to strike a careful balance between facilitating appropriate development, which seeks to address the climate crisis and support green growth on the one hand, whilst also protecting local environment and residential amenity interests on the other. As you would expect, DFI planning officials will continue to engage positively with DFE in order to ensure there is a good synergy between the energy policy work and the planning system generally. This will seek to ensure that the future energy strategy will be demonstrably aligned with fundamental environmental principles from the strategic to the local level in order to achieve the energy transition we all hope to get. It is essential that communities are fully engaged and that there is public acceptance and support for the proposed way forward, be that on the issue of targets, how they might be delivered, and through what technologies. Any future public subsidies would also need to be considered collaboratively to ensure there are no unintended consequences, and the developments which benefit from such subsidies also comply with all other regulatory frameworks, including planning. The latest annual planning statistics for 1920 indicate an approval rate of 88% for renewable energy applications, indicating that the system is continuing to help to facilitate appropriate renewable energy development. And this is quite a high approval rate in comparison to some of the other jurisdictions. But we recognise there are concerns about the planning system, particularly in terms of performance and community engagement. And that's why the Minister is continuously looking at ways to improve the system, particularly as the performance of the planning system will have a critical role in supporting our future economic and societal recovery from the current pandemic. So at the moment, the Department is undertaking a review of the implementation of the Planning Act. The focus of the review is on the implementation of the legislative provisions of the Act itself and the extent to which the original objectives of the Act have been achieved, and this will then inform whether there's a need to retain, amend or appeal any provisions in the Act. The Minister is keen to look at how we can further improve the system for all stakeholders, including councils, developers and the wider public, not just in planning decisions, but also in the delivery of new local development plans, which will provide certainty for the long term. The review will also provide an opportunity to consider any improvements or fixes which may be required to the way in which the Planning Act has been commenced and implemented in subordinate legislation. There's no doubt also that issues with the planning system that have surfaced as a result of the pandemic will be considered as part of this review as well, and that the issues raised may not always require legislative change. The Department is currently collating responses it received to a recent call for evidence exercise on the review of the Act, which asked key stakeholders and interested parties for their views. The call for evidence was posted on our website, and while it was primarily targeted at particular stakeholders, anyone who wished to express their views had the opportunity to do so. It closed on the 16th of April, and we have 56 responses received. Once responses have been collated, the Department intends to engage further with our Committee of Infrastructure in advance of preparing the review report. Whilst there are many factors which impact the overall performance of the planning system and the processing and determining of planning applications, statutory consultee response times are often cited as one of the reasons for delay. Following an independent review at the end of 2019, the Department established a cross-government planning forum comprised of senior leaders to implement recommendations made in the review into the role of statutory consultees in the planning process. The forum is working in collaboration between central and local government with a particular focus on improving processes and timeframes for processing major and economically significant applications. Strengthening community involvement is also a key part of the Minister's ongoing work to improve the planning system and people's experience of it. In October, the Minister convened the Planning Engagement Partnership to look at how to enhance the quality and depth of community engagement in the planning process at both the regional and local planning levels and help to improve the planning system experience for users. The key task of the partnership is to produce a report with recommendations to further community engagement in planning, and it's aimed to deliver the report to the Minister by this summer. To inform the work, cross-section of planning practitioners were brought together to attend 2 workshops at the end of May to reflect on community engagement in the planning process. They were drawn from the development industry, consultancies, voluntary and communities, interest, councils and the departments and representative bodies. Their input will assist in ensuring that a wide range of experience and views informs the work. and further events are planned. Finally, another key area of improvement is the digital planning agenda and the awarding of a contract in June 2020 to TerraQuest for a new planning IT system. And this is a significant investment of £14 million over 10 years, shared amongst ourselves and 10 of the planning authorities in Northern Ireland. And it's going to create a new system which will be much more citizen focused, easier for citizens to understand and engage in planning. It will facilitate online submissions, paperless office, and improvements in case management for staff and consultees alike. It will improve reporting around performance and data generally, and also introduce the flexibility for remote working, including field work and working from home. The intention is to implement the new system in phases, commencing in early 2022 and completed by spring of 2022. I'm now going to pass over to Alistair, who's going to brief you on the preparation of local development plans and the Department's consideration of some of the key regionally significant energy applications. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Alistair, I think you're on mute. No?
Can't hear you, Alistair.
Alistair, you don't appear to be on mute, but there may be an issue with using a headset. It doesn't always seem to work with Starleaf. I've no idea why, but that's just been observation over the last while. No, we still aren't hearing you.
If it doesn't work, I have what Alistair was going to say in front of me, so I can always deliver it. It'll not be as good.
The last person went out and came back in.
If Alistair even perhaps tries to go out and come back in again, if you want to start, Angus.
You want me to start? Okay,
yeah, and if Alistair
fine.
goes out and comes back in again.
Okay, so basically, start off with the situation in relation to local development plans, preparation by councils. All 11 councils are currently at various stages in the process of preparing their new plans. The purpose of each council's local development plan is to set out the council's approach for land use planning matters, with bespoke policies in place to address the local circumstances of each plan area, including climate change and renewable energy development. So each council's local development plan will be comprised of 2 documents: a plan strategy, which sort of sets out a vision, objectives, and strategy for the area, and then local policies plan, which sets out the more detailed local policies and zonings. Both documents will be tested for soundness at an independent examination. This will include a consideration as to whether or not the local development plan has taken into account policy and guidance issued by DFI, including the Regional Development Strategy and the SPPS. This is a legislative requirement. Encouragingly, 7 councils have now published their draft plan strategies. The Planning Appeals Commission has now completed the hearing sessions for the first local development plan independent examination. That was for Belfast City Council's draft plan strategy. We anticipate a report from the Commission on that independent examination in the autumn. In addition, we recently asked the Commission to undertake an independent examination into the Fermanagh and Omagh District Council draft plan strategy, which we received in December. Furthermore, since the beginning of March this year, 3 additional councils have submitted their draft plan strategies for the department for consideration, including Antrim and Newtonabbey Borough Council, Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council, and Mid and East Antrim Borough Council. The department anticipates further submissions from Derry and Strabane District Council and Mid Ulster District Council in the coming months, while the remaining 4 councils are progressing local development preparation for publication of their draft plan strategies. In bringing forward these local development plans, councils have flexibility to produce detailed operational planning policies tailored to their specific local, social, environmental and economic circumstances. Where a council deviates from the SPPS, they must ensure that they have robust evidence to show reasoned justification for such a departure, as this will be examined at the independent examination. I don't know, Alistair, are you back in again or keep going? No, still not working. So in terms of considering regionally significant and called in energy applications, members will be aware of 3 important departmental decisions in relation to energy proposals: Dorville Wind Farm, Corlackley Wind Farm and the North-South Interconnector. The Department granted full planning permission for the North-South interconnector on the 14th of September 2020, a decision welcomed by SONI and the utility regulator. The Department recognises that the interconnector is crucial to handling growing demand across electricity transmission systems in both Northern Ireland and Ireland, promoting greater competition within the single electric market for wholesale electricity trading and to protecting security of supply. It will also enhance network stability and support the future growth of renewable generation. These economic and system benefits should in turn feed through to long-term benefits for consumers. However, you may be aware that the planning permission is currently subject to a legal challenge, and with the expected 3 years construction period for the interconnector, it is hoped that the courts will come to a conclusion shortly after the hearing, which we have recently been advised has been rescheduled for early next month. The Department is required by law to make decisions in line with development plan policy unless there are material considerations indicating otherwise, and any assessment of an application entails the weighing of positive and negative impacts. That weighing of factors is evident in the cases of the Doraville and Corlacky wind farm decisions. As regards the Department's refusal of planning permission for the Doraville wind farm in October last year, that was a finely balanced decision where the various benefits had to be weighed up with the harm to the local area. The Department fully recognises that renewable energy creates sustainable infrastructure for future generations. Green infrastructure represents a real opportunity for tackling the climate emergency and helping boost the economy, but this should never be to the unacceptable cost of the surrounding environment. At Doraville, it was judged that the 33 wind turbines would cause considerable harm to the landscape interests of a large part of the Sperrin area of outstanding natural beauty and its unique archaeological, cultural and tourism assets. The economic and environmental benefits of the proposal did not outweigh the harm to these important assets. The Planning Appeals Commission report also indicated that the scale of the proposal and the sheer magnitude of the associated change has the potential to detract from local people's sense of place and connection to the land. Taking all of this into account and in line with the PAC recommendation, the Department refused this application. Conversely, the Corlacky wind farm was recently approved by the Department, as there the negative impacts upon archaeological monuments, landscape and visual amenity were outweighed by the presence of existing wind turbines, the benefits to the green energy generation and other environmental benefits. Thank you, Chair. We're happy to take any questions members may wish to put.
Thank you very much. That has been a really useful overview of, I suppose, everything in relation to planning that the committee has been engaged in terms of the various micro-inquiries that we've done, and in particular in relation to the energy strategy, which is currently out for consultation, as you've referenced. And I guess we're very conscious of the challenges, I suppose, in meeting our energy targets and, you know, moving towards renewable energy, and also balancing that against community interests and environmental interests as well. And you've covered it very well there, you know, what the department is doing in relation to that. And how that then links back to local development plans, and you've referred it in your comments to how they take account and how they have to provide robust evidence if they are deviating from the SPSS or the regional development strategy principles. But what judgment is taken by the department or in relation to those? If the department feels that evidence doesn't stack up, or are they asked to revisit those local development plans, or what is the process in respect of that? Because some concerns have been expressed recently from for example, regional energy developers, renewable energy developers, that, you know, some of the local development plans currently being progressed may hinder some of the progress in meeting the renewable targets. So I was just wondering if you had a view around that, and, you know, how that is taken account of.
I'm not sure, Alistair, are you still in play there or not?
Can you hear me now?
There you go. You might want to take that one, Alistair.
I'll take that one, yeah. Apologies, Chair, members. Well done, Angus, for covering in my absence. In relation to the local development plan process, the Department really has two functions. We are a statutory consultee to the plans, so we're there to put forward the regional view in terms of matters, and we also have a plan oversight role. At the end of the process, we have the ability to ask the councils to adopt, to amend, or to withdraw their plans. So at the moment, as all the plans come before us in draft form, we are making consultation comments in relation to those. We're generally pointing out areas where we feel that there would be areas of potential risk to soundness of the plans, and that would include, areas where we feel that perhaps plans are not really focusing in on regional planning policy, and that could include energy policy, for example. At the moment, we've just had the first Belfast examination in relation to its development plan. And so to a degree, we're still coming to grips with these things in an entirely new process. But basically, as Angus has mentioned, what we have is a situation where councils do have the ability to prepare policy for their own plan areas. So there is scope for them to look going out with the regional policy of the SPPS and so on, but they have to back that up with firm evidence. So what would be then happening is all this evidence will be tested by the Planning Appeals Commission at independent examination. And given what we saw at the Belfast examination, that would be fairly robust. So all those who have concerns about information and the prospects about proposed policies will be able to air that fully in front of the Planning Appeals Commission, and they will thereafter make a recommendation to us as a department, and it will be there for us then to consider in a report forthcoming from the Planning Appeals Commission in relation to that. And I have no doubt that a number of the electricity companies and wind generation companies, for example, those into renewable energy, will be making a case about any concerns that they have in relation to those policies.
Thank you for that. And it is useful, I suppose, to get that information. And I suppose also in relation to what we have seen over the course of the pandemic and how people are working differently, more people working from home. What sort of challenges does that pose in terms of, I guess, that regional planning policy, and is that something that is being looked at currently as well?
Perhaps if I take that one, Chair, I mean, yeah, there were significant challenges, I suppose, for the planning system generally with the pandemic, as there was, I suppose, for most business areas, as we had to respond, to actually keeping the planning system running, while the pandemic was impacting and lockdowns were kicking in and people were beginning to work from home and so forth. So there were a number of measures within the department that we had to take forward to try and help the system work in a number of different ways. There's a lot of engagement, as you can imagine, with the 11 heads of planning across the 11 different councils to try and sort of coordinate the approaches that we're going to take. We introduced some legislation to enable public meetings to be able to take place virtually for pre-application community consultation as part of that process. We also had to work with colleagues in DFC to make sure that changes were made to allow virtual planning committee meetings to work, so that planning system could continue to make changes. And then also as well, the Minister was keen to sort of send the right messages throughout the pandemic around flexibility and pragmatic approach, if you like, to planning policy in relation to some of the changes that the pandemic brought for us in terms of, for example, eating and drinking outside, takeaway businesses operating from restaurants, planning controls and conditions around distribution facilities for supermarkets and that sort of thing. So there was a whole range of measures brought in to try and keep the system going. And indeed for ourselves as well, like presumably like most of the departments, staff had to be supported to work from home, and there was a lot of work done across the group in DFI on that as well.
No, thanks for that. And I suppose I also meant kind of looking forward to, potential development and I suppose more regional balance that we may see emanating from the economic recovery plans, and as people maybe seek to work from home more regularly, and we were also seeing, for example, the Finance Minister is rolling out the regional hubs. Is there any kind of, I suppose, planning considerations being looked at in respect of that type of development?
Yeah, I suppose that's kind of our response to the pandemic and to the recovery, and the Minister is very keen that the department responds very positively to that and focuses on a green recovery. So there are a lot of there's a lot of activity around the department generally on particularly sustainable transport measures to respond to that, but also the planning system as well will be playing its part in terms of facilitating that recovery. It's a factor that councils will be looking at as they bring forward their new local development plans, and the sort of the flexibilities and so on that we've talked about that I mentioned earlier are still in place, and will move forward in that respect. So I think generally, the planning system will be wanting to play its part, if you like, in how we recover more generally as a society, and we're involved in some of the wider government work as well. For example, in the High Streets Task Force, looking at town centres, and indeed work as well on sort of better place shaping, and sort of how we can use planning to create places that will work in a kind of a post-pandemic society.
No, that's useful to know, and I appreciate some of this is work in progress as well. And I suppose I wanted to go back to the local development plans, the reviews that are currently ongoing, including in relation to renewable energy. Will the local development plans that are being progressed at the minute have to retrospectively take account of any changes that would perhaps be made emanating from those reviews?
No, I mean, we work, as I said, closely with the heads of planning and the councils so that they're aware of timescales for new policies coming through. So, the councils will progress their plans now, knowing that this policy is on its way. When the policy does come out, then plans will be at different stages in the process, and it can be unfortunate timing. But for example, if the policy comes out while a plan is going through independent examination, they will then address that at the independent examination. If a plan has just finished the process and is adopted, and when the policy comes out, then the policy will be taken into account in the ongoing reviews of the plans. There's a requirement to review the plans every 5 years.
Okay, thank you for that. Can we bring in Stuart, please?
Thank you, Chair. And you've actually touched on just the question which I was going to raise, which is around how, when policy changes, local development plans will be able to match or track those policy changes. Thinking particularly around the area where the whole thrust of government is taking us into the area of a low carbon future, the move away from fossil fuels to renewables, and how that will be tracked in local development plans. And how quickly, if you like, the ship can be turned around, because at the moment, fossil fuel projects, and I'm thinking particularly of two in my constituency, the Larnlock gas caverns and the Clock and Point applications, are both effectively, well, one is of regional significance and the other is being dealt with at a local level. But when policy changes, it might be important for those to become matters of interest under that new policy change, and I just need to understand how quickly the changes to policy will allow planners and the community and others to have a more significant input during that change.
Yeah, well, I mean, as soon as the policy does come out, it not only will it influence, as I've said, the local development plans as they come forward, and it will depend on what stage the development plan is at, as to how that impacts, if you know what I mean. Either good timing and there's an opportunity for the local development plan to reflect it, or unfortunately the particular policy changes come out maybe just after a plan's come in, and then it will be through review going forward. But the other thing to say is that as soon as policy comes out, it is material for planning decision making. So whenever we introduce a new policy tomorrow on a particular issue, then planners who are assessing planning applications on the ground across Northern Ireland need to take that policy into account in the determination of those planning applications. So it would have an immediate effect in that sense.
That's helpful to know, and I presume the same will also apply. And this is because we are all looking at this whole area around energy. That will also apply to housing as well. What's going forward? One is to see a substantial shift in terms of things like home insulation, heat pumps, and the like, and how that is going to be delivered. So can you confirm that once there's a policy change has been made, regardless of where an application is, other than the fact that it's right up to the point of approval, that a policy change will affect the approval?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as a planning policy comes out, it's taken into consideration by the planners who are dealing with those applications.
Warning in terms of if it's not going to look to future-proof in terms of energy and reduction in fossil fuels, that developers and applicants need to be very much aware of that.
Sorry, I missed the start of that. Apologies.
The comment was that therefore it's a case of buyer beware. Those people who are currently making planning applications need to be aware that these policy changes hopefully will be coming on stream very quickly, and that they need to take account of that going forward.
Absolutely, correct.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stuart. Can we bring Gary into the spotlight, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to you all for the presentation. Obviously, when I've met with energy providers over this past number of months, one of the key concerns that they have shared with me, and one of the frustrations that they have, is around the length of time that it takes for applications to be getting through the system. You touched on the statutory consultee responses, which is a particular frustration of mine. And I do welcome that the Minister has acknowledged that there is a problem there. A decade ago, when I first sat on a planning committee in a local council, we acknowledged there was a problem then. 10 years on, I think very little has changed. Obviously, we've had the review of public administration. The planning service was obviously brought within the councils at a local level. The same frustrations exist. Frankly, at times the Department for Infrastructure are the biggest culprits. One application that I'm aware of to bring jobs to the Northwest took 3 years. issues which could have been easily resolved were just protracted, and it has got to the point where developers and investors are just quite simply going elsewhere. I appreciate there's a niche problem maybe within the Northwest at times, but if we're going to bring investment and development to our areas, we need willing partners to do so. And I think that the same applies as when we were talking about an energy strategy and those who want to invest in renewables. There needs to be a change, a complete change in how we deal with these types of applications. We need to look at other areas across the United Kingdom, indeed across Europe, where progress can be made at a much faster pace. So I just want to make the point that, look, how can you give us confidence that if there is a review of the statutory consultee responses, how confident can we be that there's going to be a change and that we're not going to be dealing with the same thing in a decade's time from now?
I think what you're saying, we've heard those sort of views many times, and in some ways that has been what has kind of triggered some of the work that the Minister has been doing recently. And I suppose the two key pieces of work that to highlight would be the planning forum, which was established at the end of 2019 and has done a lot of really good work in my view in terms of getting together the really senior people in statutory consultees with planners like ourselves in the department and in councils, and to bring forward some changes and proposals to actually improve the way statutory consultation has been working. So we've begun to monitor the statutory consultee performance much more closely. We now publish statutory consultee figures on our website. And we have begun to see, just in the last couple of quarters, some improvement in those in terms of the average processing times. That's, the statutory target, you must respond within 21 days. It's the percentage that we're getting in terms of that. We're also looking at some, key pieces of work to improve how the statutory consultation process works within the planning system. So some memorandum of understanding around the roles and responsibilities, clarity around that, but also looking at sort of other areas as well, because it's an oversimplification to say that planning is slow simply because of statutory consultees. There's lots of reasons why planning is slow, often because of the complexity and controversial nature of some applications, the huge volume of kind of issues that a particular development has amongst the local community and so on. So our big sort of push on that is to focus on early engagement in the planning process. So encouraging developers to engage as early as possible with communities around their development, to understand what are the issues with local community and can they be addressed up front, thereby heading off a lot of opposition when the application comes in. Also looking at pre-application discussions with planners and statutory consultees, so that there's an expectation that if you are going to put a planning application in for such and such a development, we will expect to see a transport assessment, an environmental assessment, an assessment of flooding or whatever the particular different issues are with the development and the application, so that all comes in when the application comes in, and then there's not all the delays that happen when it comes in. It's sort of sent around, then the message comes back, we need additional information on this, and so you get into this sort of circular process of seeking information and changes and so on, and re-advertising so that the community see the changes and are aware of the additional information, and the whole process becomes quite complex. So if you can do that early on, that's very much our target. We're also looking at what we're calling a validation checklist approach, where there's a bit more clarity as to what it is that needs to make an application valid. We, in the culture in Northern Ireland here, and Alistair and I see this when we talk to our colleagues from the other jurisdictions, we've tended to sort of support applications through the system, almost like an MOT system. They're much more ruthless in the other jurisdictions. If the application does not have all the information it needs, it's just invalid and the clock doesn't start. And indeed, if it's unacceptable, it's just refused. And the endless work that goes around between developers and agents and planners in terms of trying to get it to a position where it can be approved, it's just not done. There's a subsequent application comes in or it's just left and it doesn't come in again. So there's a whole range of things that we're looking at through that sort of planning forum work, and also then the review of the Planning Act, which I touched on, which is the opportunity to look at what is not working in the legislation at the minute in the system, and what legislative fixes can we suggest, and look, I mean, the change that we brought in 2015 was massive. I mean, it was such a big change, which, the Planning Act at the time was the biggest act to go through the Assembly at that time, 26 pieces of subordinate legislation underneath it. And there have been glitches and issues with it, were things that we hadn't thought would be the way the legislation would work, and it hasn't necessarily been. So there's a lot of work to do there about fixes and so on.
No, thanks for that, Angus. A very detailed response, and I do appreciate that. I won't put you on the spot in terms of figures for now, but could you share with us, or maybe it's accessible online, I'm not too sure, but in terms of the percentage of the likes of the respondees within 21 days, that type of information, I don't know if you have it to hand, but even just to give us a flavour as to how that's broken down, and you can share it with us at the committee. Obviously, I do want to put on record that there are, certainly at the local level, a lot of efforts been made by the local planners. I think that there's a frustration about the fact that the time delays, and it just seems that there's no almost accountability, and that people can, and these statutory consultees can just breach that 21-day target, if you like, with really no consequence other than elected representatives like me or others in this call just chasing it all the time and ringing, and sometimes to no avail. So it's just about, I just, anytime I meet with a provider, an energy provider or a developer, certainly in the Northwest, it's the number one issue that I get in respect of the planning department. But I do take your points, and I appreciate that you've been very helpful. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I don't actually have the statutory consultee figures down, but I'm gonna quickly look to Scott because he may have them. If not, we can certainly send them through to you afterwards.
Thank you.
Scott. The sound's not working for Scott either.
It's the headset thing again.
Yeah. Chair, we can write to the department for those.
We'll send them those through. I know that it's in the high 70s and it's an improving picture, but we'll get that through to you.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Gary. And I suppose just a point there on the community engagement, because I think that is something that we all recognise, and probably through your constituency work, that can be an issue. And obviously there is what is statutorily required, but has the department given any consideration to what could be considered best practice as well as what is required? So, because, you've mentioned like pre-application notices and engaging with communities in advance of putting in applications so that, potential issues can be ironed out. But has any kind of consideration being given to that type of information being put forward?
Yes, I suppose that is the focus of the Minister's Planning Engagement Partnership, which she's recently established. We're really getting practitioners, academics, communities. We're working closely with community places, who are the experts in community engagement and planning across Northern Ireland as well, on that partnership, to try and examine what can we do to improve the way communities engage with planning. And then we're going to produce a report for the Minister in the summer, which is going to set out a number of recommendations. And part of it is looking at, how is the system working at the moment? Are there things that are working well and effectively? And then focus on what do we need to do better, and really a lot of the focus is about this kind of pre-application engagement, because I think everybody recognises that's so important. Not just in terms of getting the right type of development that the communities find more acceptable, but also actually in terms of the performance of the system and being able to actually deal with planning applications, effectively and quickly. So that group will be looking at that and reporting on that.
No, that's good to know. Can we bring Sinead into the spotlight, please?
Thank you very much for your briefing so far. I just following on from what Gary was expressing, I suppose all elected representatives would express similar sentiments. I believe the planning has had a historical bad reputation in relation to speed at developing plans and getting plans passed. I certainly welcome the review that the Minister has put in place in the 21st of June, or 21st of April, sorry. And it's long overdue, to be perfectly honest, because we have more than glitches, can I say, in the system, and we need to overcome them because it is seriously impacting on our economy and our ability to develop quickly, and it's impacting on investment as well. I hear from many investors that they tell us that it's too difficult. It's too difficult here when they compare working in other parts of the UK. So we have a fundamental problem, and I'm really delighted that we are considering seriously reviewing the situation and overcoming it. Obviously, in the context of energy and meeting our renewable targets, planning is fundamental to that. I've spoken to many people in the sectors, and they, as Gary has said, they are finding it a complete and utter struggle. And they're really concerned about the slow approvals for new, for example, wind turbine developments. And it is really threatening our renewable targets. And renewable targets, as you know, are quite ambitious. So we need to pull out all the stops to ensure that we meet those ambitious targets in the future. So planning is fundamental to that. Also, I'm wondering, can you give me any feedback on how the planning department deals with, for example, the treatment it deals with battery storage in particular? We're told that it's kind of been dealt with as an equal to large scale electricity generation, and again, that in itself risks delays and creates further bureaucracy and holds back innovation and investment. And I just want to see a way through these blockages so that we can come out collectively with good outcomes. We had, as you're well aware, we had micro-inquiries, economic micro-inquiry, it was a common theme from the stakeholders that engaged with us that planning was a blockage in the system. So just if you care to kind of share your views on how we overcome these.
Yes, thanks for that. I think that is probably the key and fundamental issue that we hear a lot, not just actually from the energy side, but planning has such an important impact on development in all sectors. It's the same sort of discussions I'm having with colleagues in DFC around housing and other kind of types of development as well. So look, we are very much aware of it. Hopefully you've got the very clear impression that the Minister is very keen to address it through the different measures that I've talked about here today. I think that one of the key things for me is that collaboration with yourselves in the energy side and the Department for Economy, and which we have had throughout the development of the energy strategy, which I think probably in the last generation wasn't so much there, but that's something that certainly I've prioritised very, very firmly, and the Minister has as well, and indeed that's been reciprocated from officials in economy. And when I say that, what I really mean is that people often say, planning's the buyer, planning's the problem. And yes, in some ways that's true, but planning will reflect how developments are received in the community. So we have had problems and delays with renewable energy development across Northern Ireland, but to some extent that's because we've been on a kind of a single turbine, wind farm kind of development process for a number of years, and some of Northern Ireland's population just aren't bought into that and don't buy into it. So the emphasis that we've been trying to make on our input, if you like, to the work that's been going on in the energy strategy is to be cognizant of that. To talk to communities, to talk to people about what the energy strategy is going to mean for them, and local elected representatives, so that there's an understanding. If we do opt for very high targets, if we do opt for onshore renewable energy, this is what it's going to mean. Because everybody will sign up to some of these things in strategic sense, but it's only whenever you suddenly have one of these developments in your own local area that there's a whole kind of issue with the planning application around it. And so for example, in Northern Ireland's very unique settlement pattern, there's not many places you can go where you're far away from a house or from a village. And that makes it more challenging than it does when we talk to colleagues in some of the other jurisdictions where there's actually not much development in the countryside. So, solar farms in the countryside, wind farms in the countryside have less impact on people who are living in those areas. So there's lots of issues. What does that mean for offshore solutions? From a terrestrial planning point of view, that's much better. Because you're reducing the number of developments that you have that people maybe don't want necessarily in the area. The other thing, that I believe is important is the whole issue of community buy-in and benefit to particular schemes. So community-driven renewable energy schemes and schemes that actually can be seen to be of benefit to the area within which they're put, and don't create this situation where it's seen to be external developers coming into the area, building and developing out a scheme which isn't particularly popular, and then there doesn't seem to be any benefit for the local people living in that area. So, there's a lot of factors there that if they're handled correctly through this iteration of the energy strategy, will make a big difference, I think, to the way planning works. And I'm not saying that I think there's lots of things we need to change about planning. That's what the review and so on are looking at. But I think that some of those more fundamental things about community acceptance and buy-in will make a big difference because no matter what planning system you have, no matter how streamlined it is, if fundamentally local people are really up in arms and local elected representatives are up in arms and against development, there's no planning system is going to be quick in that scenario. So I think that's my view as to where the focus needs to be.
Can I ask, have you implemented a fast lane or for economic targeted planning requests? Coming in, is it, and it's going to create jobs, or, there's an investment in, have you got a fast track for those planning requests that are going to bring employment, for example?
No, we don't. What we have is different classifications of planning applications. So we have local, major and regionally significant. So the purpose of that is so that a major application, which is over a certain size, and we tend to be the ones that create jobs and so on, councils can focus on those, and statutory consultees can focus on those and give those, the requisite attention. We can't sort of just take out a particular type of development and kind of fast track it, because there are so many different processes that you have to go through, largely around the issue of community involvement and community engagement. And we can't sort of suddenly say, look, this proposal brings jobs, so we're not going to bother with the 8 weeks public consultation, or we're not going to we're going to remove a requirement. Those things have to go through. I mean, what we have also done, I suppose, that the strategic planning policy statement does emphasise that economic factors like job creation are material planning considerations. So whilst it may not speed it, it means that those can be taken into account in whether it should be approved or refused.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sinead. Can we bring John O'Dowd into the spotlight, please?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the presentation thus far. It's been very interesting. I suppose it changed the tone for the Economy Committee, but it's obviously a major economic issue and for planning, but new faces and a change of message perhaps is always interesting. I'm sponsoring a small green energy bill going through the Assembly, and obviously that will have implications for planning if successful. Like we'll see more small green energy schemes in the countryside in terms of rural communities, farmers, but also businesses. And I suppose that relays into the point you were making there, Angus, that we have to understand as public representatives and as a community that if we have a green energy strategy, whether it's micro or macro, then that has implications for planning. And so that'll be an interesting point I'll have to take on board by going through the process by legislation. But the main point I want to raise with you was in relation to, you mentioned judicial reviews, and quite clearly judicial reviews are an important part of the democratic process of holding us all accountable. But in my opinion, there appears to be quite significant delays between the closing of the hearing and the announcement of the judgment, which the delay has economic consequences. Is there any engagement between the planners or your department and the judiciary, not specifically in individual cases, I don't expect you to mention individual cases, but on the issue of the delay between the closing of the hearing and the announcement of the judgment?
Well, unfortunately, there's far too much engagement with the judiciary in planning because sadly we do have a lot of challenges and it is quite a litigious area. But we don't sort of like periodically meet, if you like, with judiciary with these sort of things. But we have inputted to there was a recent sort of review done on the Department of Justice, I think, on prioritisation. Which brought forward did input into that, and certainly those would be that point about the delay in not just in that aspect actually, but more generally throughout the whole way some of these cases are processed. It's a point we made at that time, and also we made points around the kind of the leave hurdle, which seems, I mean, this might be just me as a planner talking, but it seems pretty low in Northern Ireland. It's fairly unusual for cases not to be granted leave. So we sort of made points, I think, around some of those sorts of issues, and also around kind of timeliness point, where sometimes cases are left, right to the end of the time limit, and that you waste time in that as well, and is that time limit correct, and so on. So we've made points as much as we can into Department of Justice's process around that, and we'll continue to do that when we have an opportunity.
I actually, at a different committee, I raised the issue of the barrier for leave with the Lord Chief Justice, because I was under the same impression. Now, the Lord Chief Justice said that it wasn't a lower bar than elsewhere, and I wasn't equipped to argue with the Lord Chief Justice, so I left it at that point. But in terms of the submission you made to that review, is that public, and could we have a copy of it if it is?
To be honest, I don't know. It's going back a bit now, so I'd need to check that. I need to check. It was a while ago that would have been sent through, and that engagement took place. And I should say that I'm also probably not equipped to argue with the Lord Chief Justice about the leave barrier, and it may well be just my sour grapes on my part and a planner's perception, but we shall see.
That's that. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. Can we bring Claire into the spotlight, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. I suppose it's really just to reiterate some of the points that have already been made by other members, just in relation to, because I would say that planning generally, and certainly my experience in my own constituency within this area, I find that there's a lack of consistency in applying planning policy, and I suppose then that will have an impact not just for Coast and Glens area, but also right across Northern Ireland, because whilst there's inconsistency within this area, then inconsistency across all of Northern Ireland, and any opportunities moving forward to try and address that, I think will be important. And you had talked to the slowness around the planning policy. To an extent, I don't accept the comments around that's to be expected because of community representations, which of course are valid and need to be part of the process. But I do think that there is a way that we can try and speed this up for the economic benefit, not just in my area, but right across Northern Ireland and other jurisdictions, across the UK, indeed seem to be able to achieve that. So I'm not sure why we in Northern Ireland are not able to achieve that. So I suppose what I'm just sort of saying to you and encouraging is if we can somehow apply the process in a consistent way, but also, and I say this maybe even to contradict myself, but with flexibility too, because on the other side of the argument we see issues, really quite insignificant issues, because people aren't being flexible in terms of the specific circumstances of certain areas. So it's just a quick commentary around that. And kind of conversation that you hear about today in relation to renewables and how we can take those particular applications forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the consistency point's a really good point, and it does come up a lot as well. And actually, in some ways, the decision to transfer planning to councils, I suppose, reduced the ability for consistency, and it did so in a very local planning should be delivered by local councils. So what Belfast does in relation to certain types of development and policies will be different to what Derry does, or Fermanagh, or Causeway Coast and Glen. So in handing over powers to councils and in creating that two-tier planning system that we now have, you unfortunately do get a little bit of inconsistency as part of that. Previously, whenever it was all DOE planning, we would have been under quite a lot of pressure to be very consistent and in how everything was delivered across planning. Whereas that now, I suppose, has changed to some extent. Having said that, I'm thinking, as Alistair touched on earlier, we're very much in the business of trying to make sure that there is a degree of consistency in terms of how the Minister's strategic and regional policies are implemented, so that it's a balance. They've got to take account of those, to have regard to them properly, and if they are at council level for good local reasons and have the evidence to do so, to meet local issues, then that's fine. But that needs to be handled very carefully, and there needs to be good evidence in terms of deviating from that.
So yeah, I appreciate those comments, and I suppose that was almost going to be my suggestion. Whilst those specific policies are devolved to local government, is there a role that the Department for Infrastructure can play almost in providing guidance to kind of try and shore up the varying kind of decisions that are made within council areas? Like, to even just give you an example, my understanding is the cafe pavement licence requires planning in Causeway Coast and Glens, but doesn't require it in any other council area. So there's going to be an impact in this constituency because of that, because of the bureaucracy around it. So and that will have a wider issue for regional balance and all of that. So anything that the department can do to try and sort of enable or ensure that council areas across Northern Ireland are approaching it in a way that will ensure the best outcomes for all, really.
Absolutely, agree with that, and I mean we do try to do that as much as we can. We regularly meet the councils to try and create that sense of a level of consistency.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Claire. I think that's all of our questions. So look, thank you very much for coming to our committee. It was a really useful briefing for us, and I think we got a lot out of it and a lot of issues covered there. And I think the points have been well made about the role that planning has in economic development and the importance that it is going to have in terms of particularly the energy strategy and development going forward. So look, thanks very much, and I think we'll have a few actions that we'll be following up on from this briefing as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, members, so if we maybe just start with this one, Peter has a few actions that he has noted down there, and a couple of them are that we would write to the Justice Committee on that issue around the bar for judicial reviews, and potentially to the Infrastructure Committee as well.
Yes, Chair.
Can I sorry, my camera fell. Can I just raise on that issue around judicial reviews? I'm not certain that I'm as opposed to JRs of planning decisions as other members might be, because of basically the bitter experience of my constituents, particularly in inner city Belfast. Belfast City Council, as you know, has a policy of basically trying to get 50,000 people, new residents, into the centre of the city. The consequence of which has been for communities like the Market, Donegal Pass and Sandy Row, and the village as well. It's basically been a proliferation of huge apartment blocks going up. And those apartment blocks, in many instances, they look down metaphorically and physically on the communities in which they're planted. Now, there was recently a successful challenge by the Markets Development Market. Oh, market, not plural markets. That'll get you into trouble. It's the market. They recently won a successful JR. So I appreciate what was said. I mean, on the other side of the equation, I understand that JR has basically created a situation where £85 million has been spent on a road and not a centimetre of it has been laid. But by the same token, I actually think in many instances my constituents have availed of JR successfully to defend their rights, not to be overshadowed by huge developments. I just think sometimes there's part of me thinks that the outflowing of government policy in terms of the communities that are already well established in the city centre will be basically in 20 years' time. The only way you'll know that those communities existed is because there'll be like a bronze statue of a man with a flat cap outside the local Starbucks. So I mean, I'm not hostile to communities, and I'm sure John's not either. I'm not suggesting that he is, but I actually think JR inside the planning process has been something that I have supported in the past and my constituents have availed of in order to defend their rights.
Thanks, Christopher. I know I think that the point has been made that the right to judicially review things is obviously important to people, and to have that as part of the process. I think what we're proposing is that we get an understanding of what that bar is in terms of leave to take a judicial review, and if the Justice Committee is just looking at any work around that. But John's looking to come in for a comment anyway.
Well, that's grand. If it's just to find out the actual position, no, that's no problem at all. That's dead on.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's just to clarify that, of course, the judicial review is an important democratic part of the system, and it holds us planners and decision makers such as ourselves to account. So I'm certainly not arguing against the role of the judicial review. I have concerns about the delay in judgments being delivered at times. That would be my main concern.
Thanks, John. So members are content that is what we would be looking for in terms of writing to the Justice Committee. And Peter?
Chair, also the Infrastructure Committee, just to put down a bit of a marker, if you like, about the significant interest for the economy remit in the planning process. It was just very interesting how the officials mentioned the High Street Task Force and their involvement in it. Obviously, again, that's a TEO lead, but this committee has a huge interest. And as they mentioned extensively, obviously one of the reasons they were here was the energy strategy and the need there will be for planning to be properly aligned with that, and for the councils and so on to take cognizance. So it's really just to write to the Infrastructure Committee to let them know that this committee has an interest in anything that's being done around planning, and to ask them just to keep us in the loop. There's a number of reviews that are coming out that were mentioned by the officials, and I think it's just important we don't miss anything on those.
Yeah, and I think it is reassuring to hear the officials recognise that they are involved in the development of the energy strategy and the work that is being done in respect of that. So that is useful for us to be aware of as well. So members are content that we'll do those two things?
Chair, we also pick up on the figures that were discussed around the 21 days. I think they said they had figures, but what we'll do is we'll just write and get those just so that we have them. I know members were quite interested in seeing just how that worked out. I got the impression they do have them, they just didn't have them to hand.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And then just to go back to the previous briefing on the High Street Voucher scheme, so we wanted to get some clarifications from the department. Peter, do you just want to reflect on?
Yeah, Chair, there's a number of clarifications there. I think it's worth just getting in a number of questions that they may not be able to answer now, but that we will want a response to around how this spending can be tied down locally. How they can actually say, they can set a geographic limit on how the spending works. Additional to that, also the issue around who they have spoken to in terms of reaching people with disabilities, the disadvantaged and so on. So I also would suggest, if members are content, we'll start pumping out to our own stakeholder groups on our Twitter feed that we'd like them to get in touch with us if they want to have an input to that. I think it's useful. The committee could be a useful gathering point for those sorts of views. Also, the age range. The officials talked about 18, but they did seem open to the idea of possibly 16, 17 years. That seemed to be part of the policy that needs to be pinned down, but I think it's worth getting in a question on that so that we get an official answer. Also, the issue around whether the £100 voucher would impact on people's benefits, I think it's really good that we get a direct, specific answer for that we can then potentially put out to people so that they know where they stand. Also, the question around the multiplier effect, just trying to get something on paper about the anticipation of that, because that's a huge part of what the scheme is for. Is you put that money out there, it has a wider effect on the economy, and I didn't get a sense that has been pinned down, so getting in a question on that we can get an answer to would be useful.
Okay, and are members content with those things? Yeah.
Chair, can I come in briefly? I don't really believe that we got any sense of the economic impact. And whilst I know it's not a job creation scheme, it is certainly it's certainly about maintaining jobs within the particular sectors and retail. And I didn't get any sense of that at all. So I really do feel that as a committee we need to dig deep into this economic impact. Because I just have no clarity. And in fact, I've got a real sense that either have they. They talked about it being a very innovative scheme, very difficult to tie down, very difficult to understand, what the multiplier effect would be, whether, what was the indirect economic impact in terms of supply chains, all of that. We didn't have any sense of it. It's really very much up in the air. It's an awful lot of money not to actually know what the bottom line is going to be in the economy. In the region of 45p per pound spent, but not quite sure. And so for a policy that is about to be run out in a few months' time, there's more questions than really answers at the minute. So I would agree with John Dowd around that. That this scheme doesn't feel ready to run yet from our briefing this morning.
Chair, the other thing, Chair, that occurred to me during the session, because members have brought up a lot of issues there, now that we have a kind of outline, it might be a good point to do what the committee had talked about previously in terms of bringing in our stakeholders for a discussion event on this. I'm conscious of the fact that they will have views as to how well this kind of voucher scheme might help secure jobs, might help them not only retain the jobs that they already have, but how they would then look at potentially using it to expand out their operations, expand out their workforce. Because the committee has talked before about what happens at the end of the furlough, and there's every chance that this scheme will coincide potentially with the end of furlough. So I think it's maybe the time to start organising that kind of discussion event so we can hear that from stakeholders direct. If members are content, we can probably get that done reasonably quickly. I can hear my team screaming somewhere, but I think we could probably sort that out pretty fast.
Yeah, no, I think that could be useful, Peter. And I think that certainly there's an awful lot of money being directed towards the scheme. In principle, it sounds really positive, but it would be very useful for us to pin down some of the specifics, and in particular the exact policy intent and the process around it all, because we do want it to be very impactful in terms of what is actually going to be delivered out of it. So it's important that we as a committee have an understanding of the entire scheme and everything around it, and also to apply the level of scrutiny that's necessary as well.
Chair, the other thing that occurred to me is that we really didn't even get the opportunity at this point to get into the holiday at home voucher scheme. We did have a representative from TNI, but that scheme seems less clear. I know I've had stakeholder groups have been in contact with the committee office saying they don't really understand how it's going to work. And I think it might just be useful to talk to the sector. We have NITA in, I think, in 3 weeks, but I think, you know, it's probably useful to get that scheme discussed as part of the discussion event with the HSS, because it's more complex, and certainly reading it, I know I wasn't fully clear on how it would work. So if members are content, we can bring that one in as well, because I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done just around pinning down what exactly it does and how it's going to run.
Yeah, and similarly, it's a first come, first serve. So, you know, there's, you know, who's potentially going to benefit from that. I mean, from a constituent level as opposed to a business level, because obviously businesses will benefit, but individuals as well. Okay, so if members are content, we'll set up that discussion event, and hopefully that will give us some more information.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, is that everything in relation to that, Peter?
Yep, so far that I can see. If there's anything else occurs to us when we do the wash-up on this, we get back to members to seek clearance.
Okay, so we'll move on then to item number 6, which is our matters arising. 6.1 at page 169 of your packs, there's a response from the Minister regarding penalties for St John's Ambulance in submitting late accounts to Companies House. The Minister highlights that charities are within the remit of the Department for Communities, and the actions of Companies House are not within devolved competence. So if members are content, we will forward this correspondence to the Department for Communities for a response, and also copy it to the Communities Committee. Members agreed? Okay, thank you. 6.2 then at page 170, there is a response from the Minister regarding support for Include Youth essential skills provision. The Minister states that her department, along with the Education and Health departments, are liaising with Include Youth on potential funding options. So this is to note at this stage, and the clerk is going to be in correspondence with Include Youth, and will keep the committee updated in relation to it.
Yeah, Chair,
it's
Claire,
good to know that this is being progressed.
Claire's in contact. She gave me a bit of a read out of the first meeting, and they have others planned. So I keep coming back to the committee with that as it goes along.
Okay, thank you. 6.3 then, page 171 of the pack, there is correspondence from the Minister outlining the key findings of the evaluation of the extraordinary awarding arrangements for vocational qualifications during summer 2020. The Minister states that certificates awarded were 83% of the number made in the previous year. It is suggested that the findings indicate a significant achievement, along with the high satisfaction levels recorded in the evaluation stakeholder survey. So this is to note at this stage, and the committee has an informal meeting with the colleges tomorrow, so we'll be able to discuss this with them then, unless members have any comments to make. Okay, thank you. Moving on then to 6.4, page 220, there's a response from the Department regarding support for independent wedding venues and reopening. The Department sets out the various support schemes available, but recognises there may be some within this sector who have not been able to avail of the same support of others. The Minister highlights the next formal review of the restrictions will be carried out by the Executive on the 13th of May. So members are content, we'll forward this response to the individual who's raised the matter.
Thank you.
Thank you. 6.5 then, page 222 of your packs, there's a copy of a response from the Department to the Finance Committee, who sought clarification regarding outstanding funds to members of the Presbyterian Mutual Society. The response sets out the potential reasons preventing further monies being available, including the investment of assets in the property market, which may impact on commitments being realised. So members are content, we will note, as this is Finance Committee with correspondence.
Thank you.
Okay. Page 224 then, 6.6, there's a response from the Consumer Council following the committee's request for further information on the rights of students as consumers. The Consumer Council states it was recently contacted by the students, or the NUS-USI, on this issue, and began discussions with colleagues in the Department for the Economy and with trading standards. It outlines that the Department has no remit in determining whether students should receive a refund or reduction of their tuition fee, but that the Minister has asked universities to ensure that they are fully compliant with consumer law, and they are clear with new and returning students about what they can expect from their course during the pandemic. So just to advise members, NUS, USI and other student unions are expected to brief the committee on the 19th, and we can discuss this with the student union representatives then. So are members content to note?
Sure, just on that matter, did we inquire at that stage about students' rights in relation to rental contracts, etc.? Is that something that falls under the Consumer Council?
That would, Chair, that would be the same as consumer law and the right to be dealt with fairly and so on. I'm trying to think, did we say anything specifically about it? I need to check back to the correspondence that we sent originally, Chair, but I think we were fairly expansive in the issues that we'd flagged up for them to look at. But I'll go back and check to make sure that was highlighted to them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. 6.7 then, page 22 of our table papers. There's a confidential written briefing from the department providing an update on Project Stratum, and just to advise members that further oral briefings will be scheduled on Project Stratum at an appropriate time. So are members content to note? Thank you. 6.8 then, at page 24 of table papers, there's a response from the Minister to the committee's request for further information on the target dates for the pathway out of restrictions. The Minister states that while the department has not specifically developed any targets to assess when businesses can progress along the relevant pathway, it has input to the Executive Office processes in relation to economic impacts in keeping with the priorities set out in the pathway document, and has monitored the impact of COVID on the economy since the outbreak of the pandemic. And obviously we will have the opportunity to raise these issues with the Minister at next week's meeting. So are members content to note?
Thank you.
Thank you. 6.9 then, at page 25 of table papers, there's a response from the department regarding support for the English language teaching sector. The response states that it has not been possible to legislate for every scenario or to meet the growing demands arising from all sectors and industries. And obviously we agreed earlier in today's meeting to have an informal meeting with representatives of that sector so we can discuss the issues in further detail. So are members content to note?
Thank you.
Thank you. Then 6.10, page 26 of table papers, there's further correspondence from the pilot who had recently contacted the committee regarding changes to the European Union Aviation Safety Agency professional pilot licences post-Brexit. This pilot licences are all EASA but were issued by the UK Civil Aviation Authority, as is the norm for EU member states. However, post-Brexit, this pilot is not entitled to practice flying in an EASA-registered aircraft, nor can he use his air traffic control licence in any European country. So the members might remember we considered a response from the Civil Aviation Authority on the issue, which it passed on to the individual. The CAA stated that it supported UK commercial pilots to transfer their licences to other EU member states to allow them to continue to operate within both systems if the scenario were to materialise. The CAA has recently introduced a process for these individuals to easily obtain a new UK pilot licence which they can hold alongside their EASA. The department has not yet responded to this issue, so if members are content that we will forward this additional correspondence from the pilot and the Civil Aviation Authority response to the department to ask whether it's aware of the issues being raised and what work is ongoing to ensure that there is mutual recognition of licences. And is there a British department, Peter, that might be appropriate for us to contact in relation to this issue as well?
Chair, there will be, and I'm thinking it falls into that wider issue around mutual recognition of professional qualifications. Off the top of my head, I can't remember which English department it is, but we will. It could be transport, but I think there's more to it than that. There's a specific minister,
Okay.
so we'll track down the specific minister because otherwise it'll take the letter forever to get there. So if we get a particular minister, we pursue that, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, we'll move on then to item number 7, which is the SR 2021-112, the Employment Rights NI Order 1996, Coronavirus Calculation of a Week's Pay Amendment Number 2, Regulations NI 2021. There's a clerk's memo at page 227 and the SR itself is at page 229. Members will remember, because I think we dealt with the SL1 last week, this SR ensures that, consistent with the principal regulations as originally made, various statutory entitlements based on a week's pay and connected with termination of employment are not reduced as a result of an employee being furloughed under the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. The committee approved the SL1 on the 28th of April. This statutory rule is subject to negative resolution procedure and came into operation on the 30th of April. The examiner of statutory rules has not yet reported on the rule, so members will be agreeing to the legislation subject to the examiner's report. So if members are content, we'll put the question that the Committee for the Economy has considered the SR 2021-112, the Employment Rights Northern Ireland Order 1996 Coronavirus Calculation of a Week's Pay Amendment Number 2, Regulations Northern Ireland 2021, and has no objection to the rule subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report. Okay, so moving on then to item number 8, which is correspondence. On page 242 of your packs, a written briefing from the Department on the 2021-22 main estimates to facilitate the legislative stage in the budgetary process. As discussed at last week's budget briefing, the main estimate is normally based on the final initial budget position. However, as part of the 2021-22 final budget, the Executive made a number of funding commitments because the Secretary of State had not yet confirmed those allocations to be formally made. So DOF will take forward post-budget allocations in the coming weeks to align these allocations with the main estimate. The DFE areas that will be captured are the 276 million, 276 million resource DEL and an 11 million capital DEL for the Economic Recovery Action Plan, and 0.9 million for the public service obligation for the City of Derry Airport. So this is just to note at this stage, if members are content.
Thank you.
Moving on then to 8.2. At page 245 of your pack, there's correspondence from the Public Accounts Committee and copies of written assembly questions regarding concerns raised anonymously around DFE Energy Division, including that lessons have not been learned from RHI and around the University of Exeter governance report. So just to remind members that the committee previously agreed to hear from the University of Exeter academics, and that session is currently being arranged. So if members are content to note this at this point.
Thank you.
8.3 then, at page 260 of our packs, is correspondence from a manufacturing business regarding concerns around disadvantaged manufacturers in the north which they face when competing with businesses in Britain due to the rules of origin for goods travelling from Britain to the north for processing, and the fact that an EU anti-dumping tax at 34% will be applied to aluminium extrusions supplied from China. So if members are content, we'll forward this on to the Minister and to the Executive Office to ask whether they are aware of this issue and whether it has been raised with the British Government and the Joint Committee. It was correspondence forwarded on from John O'Dowd, so unless John wants to add anything to that.
No, Chair, that's appropriate action for it.
Thank you. So 8.4 then, at page 262 of our packs, there's a copy of the Institute of the Chartered Accountants in England and Wales's Regulatory Board annual report, so it's just for members to note. Okay, thank you. 8.5 then, at page 295, there's a copy of CBI's COVID Working Group notes from the 28th of April, including an outline of the labour market and workplace safety issues. So unless members have any issues to raise, that's to note also. Thank you. 8.6 then, page 297 of your packs, there is a copy of the 35th report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, so that's for members to note. 8.7 then, at page 28 of table papers, there's a copy of a response from the Construction Employers Federation to the Strategic Investment Board's call for evidence on a new investment strategy for the North. Just to advise members that the 2021 call for evidence closed at the end of April, with a formal consultation on that strategy being expected in the summer. And just if members are agreed, we will request an update detailed timeline on the investment strategy from the department. Okay. So moving on then to item number 9, which is any other business, and none has been highlighted to us. So then just moving on to item number 10, which is the date, time and place of our next meeting, which is next Wednesday morning in room 30. And just also to remind members that next Wednesday's meeting will have the earlier start time of 9:30 to allow the Minister to be able to leave by 11:15. And also that we have an informal meeting tomorrow morning at 11 via Teams with the colleges that we referred to earlier. So that is it for today. And if members, we're just going into closed session here, so if members would just hang on for a few minutes.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is